Somewhere in the castle, a fierce clash erupted. Blades clanged in relentless exchange, a battle between a hero and a demoness. Both of them were baffled by what was happening. Everything was strange to the hero, and the demoness was so surprised that she could not come to terms with it. Neither of them could understand why their weapons stubbornly refused to break each other. Each was truly certain his weapon was the most powerful. They both took a step back, and the same question spun in their minds, and at the same time they tried to say it as if they knew the answer, yet still had to ask. It was the same for both. Who forged your sword? When their gazes slid over the weapon's pommel, they noticed a mark. Silence fell in Carvetti. The demonist arrived. Finally, everything fell into place. It was the work of a stubborn blacksmith, and the hero understood this. He quietly exhaled as soon as he reached that very conclusion. From the flow of their clash, in battle, the hero realized the forces were equal, and fighting further with the same weapons was pointless. The demonizers reached the same conclusion. There was no sense in prolonging the clash, and at that moment, for a moment, a rare agreement fell. For their generation, the truce became the only reasonable choice. The quiet irony was that they simply did not want to provoke the blacksmith who stood behind these blades. The demonists decided that the blacksmith could have already anticipated such a turn, so underestimating him was a mistake. The hero grasped this thought, and that was where they parted ways. All this began and revolved around one figure, the legendary blacksmith. But even before these events, the same man once died. It all began the day he stepped forward to save a cat from a truck rolling straight toward him. In his previous life, this step was the final left, living only with love for cats. When he opened his eyes, he immediately realized he was not lying down, he was flying, suspended in the air. Nearby, a voice sounded, "Are you not sleeping?" Idzo woke up and felt as if nothing had happened to his soul. He asked who she was, and the girl replied briefly, "In that world he died." Iso remembered how he once saved a cat. When he looked at his own hand, he realized he was dead and wondered why it felt so calm. The girl explained that under normal circumstances his soul would be. He should have been dismantled and preserved as a new resource, but she paused this process and slowed his spirit so the shock would not shatter the soul. She saw how before dying he saved a stray cat, and Iso acknowledged this. Then she confessed. That cat was actually her, and this realization confused him. Guard, she called herself a watchwoman, one who crosses between worlds and carefully watches to ensure they do not harm each other. In his world, she transformed into a cat to keep watch. She confessed that she messed up and almost died, but Iso saved her just in time. Iso pondered, it sounds like she holds a high position, but could a truck accident really kill her? The girl clarified only her temporary body would die. And that loss would be only temporary, no real impact on the world itself. Then she explained, now there was an unfortunate malfunction. Iso died at a time when he shouldn't have. To fix everything, they decided, she would compensate him by giving him another life. Iso admitted he didn't fully understand how it worked and thought, maybe it would be easier just to erase that accident than to go through such a complicated process. The girl explained that would be the simplest solution, but the problem was that she had already seen how everything happened. What she saw would be reported and recorded, and that could no longer be undone. She apologized and said that Iso's death could not be reversed. Iso finally understood. She had nothing left, she could do nothing more. Then the girl quietly said that this had already happened in another world. She decided to swap their existences, to transfer another being into Iso's world and Iso into theirs. He was struck by the very thought. He could not help but ask himself if this meant he would have to live as another person, and she confirmed. He understood everything. Iso insisted on one last question. Why did she so persistently save him? The girl admitted that she was mistaken, and that Iso had saved her so it would be unbearable for her if he really disappeared. After that, she explained it turned out there was another reason. To prove her sincerity, or rather gratitude, she decided to give him a cheat for the world where he would be sent. Iso could not get the thought of that cheat out of his mind. The girl explained that he would be given something like special knowledge or skills that would make life in that world much easier, and also promised to arrange a home for him. After that, she asked what he saw as his ideal life. That, Iso froze for a moment and replayed his past in his mind again. He lived without family, completely alone, spending his days working as a programmer in a company that felt more like a sweatshop, and did not even notice how he had aged. His hair had turned gray. The only person who might notice his absence was the boss, and even then, a replacement would be found quickly. When the thoughts finally shifted in his head, he felt nothing held him here anymore. but he was not going to disappear. It felt like a second chance. It makes sense. He decided it would be wonderful to earn money by creating things. It had been his hobby all his life. The girl immediately agreed and confidently stated that it could be arranged. Iso added that, although everything happened by accident, he loves cats so much that he would risk his life to save them. If it were possible, he would want to live slowly and peacefully among cats. And then the girl asked what exactly he wanted to create. He fell silent and suddenly realized his whole life had drawn him to swordsmithing, but the opportunity to try never came. She also agreed to this, and she dressed him in the experience and skills of a blacksmith, added language knowledge, a general understanding of the world, some combat skills, and just a little magical power. A sudden flash of light closed ISO, and the next moment he was thrown down. He woke up in the middle of the forest. He slowly sat up and pain spread throughout his body, and his head seemed to be splitting from a pounding pulse. As soon as this happened, something strange suddenly stirred in his head. Iso could not understand what was happening inside him, in his head, in his body, and even in the tips of his fingers, when a stream of unfamiliar information poured in without warning. Suddenly it became clear. At this very moment, everything finally settled within him. His former life was finally over. He felt everything was finally starting to come together. To check himself, he opened his hand and clenched it. The body seemed to have been rebuilt, Ainwit, filled with unfamiliar knowledge and experiences that initially were not supposed to be there, and this feeling became eerily strange, as if something unnecessary was simply attached to him. Next to him, he noticed a house. He remembered the girl said she was preparing something for him, so he approached and opened the door. He opened the door and quickly went inside. He looked around and immediately recognized the kitchen. Kitchen, bedroom, ingredients, and various tools, everything needed for daily life was in place, so he decided that these supplies would last him for some time. And there was neither electricity, nor running water, nor a well here either, and he immediately realized he would have to look for a water source. After this, he noticed another room nearby. Having entered inside, he froze in amazement. Before him was a workspace, and all the materials and tools were already laid out ready. He grabbed the hammer. His hands and fingers moved so naturally, as if they themselves knew when and how to engage them. Realization overwhelmed him instantly and flawlessly. I know this. Finally it came to pass, the very thing called cheat along. He knew how to cast a little magic, and soon hunger crept up unnoticed. By the light, it seemed to him as if it were already noon. So he decided to prepare something for lunch, and after the meal, he planned to go outside and look for a water source. Of course, he set about preparing the ingredients in the kitchen and lit a fire, not taking his eyes off his hand. With strange surprise, he noticed that his hand was capable of producing a small flame. This was not enough to last long or heat up to a high temperature, but it was enough to ignite. As soon as everything ended, he got ready to go outside and set off in search of water. Wandering through the forest, he suddenly noticed a green squirrel. This world vividly reminded him he was no longer in his native world. He wondered what this forest might be like and how vast it was. Whether there were cities or villages nearby, he did not know. He was told almost nothing about such things. In the end, he had to admit, apart from his own abilities, he knew almost nothing about this world. Step by step, he reached the grass and immediately recognized it medicinal. It became clear to him that this was part of the basic knowledge he had been given, so although he was surprised, he picked a few such plants. At the same time, he felt that both his mind and body were slowly getting used to this new world for him. Then he moved forward and estimated how much was left to the house. It turned out that it would take about 15 minutes to walk to the house, a good daily workout. Soon he came across a source of fresh water. When he looked at his reflection, he was suddenly struck. His appearance had changed. Everything changed. The girl made him a little younger, exactly as he asked, so now he looked about 30 years old. He saw a fish in the water and immediately realized fishing could also be an option. Soon a rustle sounded nearby. He listened and wondered what it could be because he felt something was lying there. When he rolled closer to check everything, he saw a woman lying unconscious. He approached even closer and carefully examined her condition. He saw that she was bleeding, and turning her over stopped the flow. Looking more closely, he saw a tail and could not understand who she was. A human, a tiger, or some kind of beast human. He felt if he did not bring her immediately to his home, she would not survive. So he carried her just as he. As soon as he did this, her body convulsed with pain, but he still did not stop. Wasting time was not allowed. Returning home, Iso searched for sewing tools, only fabric remained. He tore off several scraps, fashioned bandages, and boiled water to sterilize the needle. Iso carefully laid the woman on the bed and began examining her wounds. As expected, the most serious was the wound on her abdomen. Thanks to the knowledge he had gained, he knew exactly what to do, endure the procedure, and it really proved useful. He took the sterilized needle with thread and stitched the wound properly. While he worked, the woman suddenly shuddered from pain, but he did not rush, carefully brought everything to an end. After that, he fed her some herbs. And then it seemed her condition finally stabilized. He thought with relief that he had managed to provide first aid even if as an amateur. He realized if the wound left a scar, he would have to accept it and feel guilty for a long time. Iso thought about how to disinfect the wound and reduce the fever, then smiled with relief. The herbs he had gathered earlier turned out to be useful. Fatigue quickly caught up with him, and he understood. From now on, this was the world he would have to live in. He pondered preparing for the life of a blacksmith. There was still much to do, but this was his second chance, so he wanted to go slower and calmer without returning to a life of constant, exhausting labor. He decided it was better to start work the next day, and in the meantime to check in from time to time how she was doing. He knew falling asleep was a bad idea, but fatigue overcame him anyway. He carefully laid his head on the bed and fell asleep in a moment. Time passed and the woman found herself above him. For him, it was the start of a new chapter in life. The tigress suddenly clung to his neck and Ice instantly felt there was not a gram of strength in her grip. It turned out she was not trying to kill him at all. He carefully examined the wound on her abdomen. Her mood swung back and forth and changed every time while he remained calm. She made it clear that it still hurts, although it is already healing. The call that brought him relief. Later she noticed. Did he see her body? Iso understood. There is no other choice. He must examine it to treat her correctly and prove by his actions that he did nothing unnecessary. She leaned in, inhaled his scent, then sharply pulled back, deciding to trust him for now. There was not a single hint of a lie in him. Iso stood confused. He did not fully understand, and she checked it against the heartbeat. It reveals what state you are in. He sighed with relief. Everything was fine, and the situation did not become awkward. He handed her a few things and insisted that she get dressed. He explained the previous clothes were soaked in blood, so they had to be cut during treatment. Iso doubted whether he meant anything to her at all, so he quietly apologized and realized he might not have seen how important he was to her. She did not worry. For her, these were just old, worn-out racks. She looked around and asked if it was him. He confirmed as soon as she asked what he was doing here. Iso had a fleeting thought to call himself a blacksmith. But to be honest, he had settled there only the day before. She looked intently at him and did not feel any lie. Yet she noticed she did not remember a single house in this part of the forest. Iso explained that this house had stood here even before his arrival. She pondered and said, "From this side of the Black Forest you rarely come, so you might not have noticed." And the mention of the Black Forest stirred a faint feeling of familiarity in him. And here, judging by the available data, he suddenly realized this area is east of the forest. At first she said that this usually happens in the north or west, but yesterday, resting here, she came across a large black bear. Since then everything spun and unfolded exactly as it happened. Eventually she understood. If Iso had not found her, this creature would have simply killed her. Hearing about that dangerous being in the forest, Iso shuddered with fear. He felt that he was truly lucky. Yesterday he did not encounter it and immediately wondered how long it would take for her wounds to fully heal. He concluded werewolves have bodies much stronger than humans, but in her current state hunting or scouting would have to be forgotten at least for 2 weeks. Iso considered the idea. What if she could live at his home? His proposal caught her by surprise. He had just arrived here and was already thinking of finding someone to help with the household and the forge. In return, he would give her shelter and food until she recovered, and that sounded quite fair. She paused for a moment. Holding on for another second, he thought everything through properly and finally agreed. He did not look suspicious at all, so she decided to stay until the wounds healed and she could move normally again. Again, what would happen next could be decided later, so Iso, feeling there was no point in rushing, agreed. It didn't matter. She smiled quietly, accepting the idea that for now she would be under his care. Then he asked her name. Time passed and she finally realized her name was Samia. To him, the name sounded wonderful, but she did not like it. She considered it weak, without charm, and would have preferred something louder. Iso equated it to something like Gonzalez. She laughed at that, so strange and so unexpected. This noticeably but still slightly irritated Iso. However, he still sincerely believed. A name given by family naturally suits the one who bears it. This made her laugh. For a moment the mood lightened, and then Iso said his name, Iso Tanya. And as soon as he realized this, he understood. People like him, with the same traits, mostly come from the northern regions of this world. Somia blinked in confusion. Surnames were extremely rare here. Such names usually hinted either at status or land ownership, so starting with the name Smithy in this picture was completely inappropriate. But Iso felt it would be better if she simply accepted everything as it is. He wanted her to just call him by his name, and she agreed. After some time, Iso was finally ready to get to work. In his opinion, there was already enough of that, so he decided to start by making a small knife. First, he lit a fire in the hearth. While the coals had not yet fully ignited, he maintained the heat. Using wind magic, he adjusted the airflow so that the ventilation remained steady, as if controlling bellows. The fire was not too fierce, so he confidently managed on his own. But the heat stubbornly proved stronger than he thought. As soon as the temperature passed 800 degrees Celsius, the steel began to change color, a sign that it was ready to be forged. Idzo understood the process from the theory he was given, but in practice, he was doing it for the first time. This, thanks to the cheat, he immediately recognized when the iron. He had already reached the desired state, yet he still felt out of place. He himself was surprised and could not comprehend. Is this really his ability? The power in every hammer strike felt foreign. He recalled earlier how he carried some Mia home and ran for water. Even in his 30s, he never had such strength. Suddenly he realized the body had become stronger. He was already about to start the afternoon work as soon as Samia finished lunch and rested a bit. Reaching the last steps, he was forging iron, reheating it again, and then cooling it. Next, he decisively plunged the metal into water, thus hardening the blade. He filed the blade with a file, then brought it to a sharp edge, sharpening on a wet stone step by step. Step by step, Izo relied on the knowledge invested in him and transformed it through his actions into living experience. His movements merged with the skills given to him, leading the body to true mastery, clearly reflected by the sharp shape of the blade. Some time passed, and the knife was finally ready. This creation became his first work, so he wondered what to test it on and chose a bunch of vegetables. When the blade cut through them completely, he froze in amazement. It cut cleanly, even piercing into the board under the vegetables. He couldn't believe how sharp it was. None of the knives in the house even came close to this one, so he began to doubt, was this really the effect of that cheat? The blade, which passed through the material so easily, looked almost unnatural and at the same time dangerously effective. He thought better to take it for self-defense and at least attach a proper handle to it. Iso felt this very clearly. If you rely too much on the cheat, the knife will become excessively sharp too quickly, and such a blade is too dangerous to sell on any market. With this in mind, he decided. The next day he would make 3 more knives, one sharper than the first, another slightly less sharp, and the last barely sharp. At first, he planned to ask Samia to test them before deciding what to do next. She was still sleeping, and Iso gently woke her and whispered that dinner was already ready. She stirred inside. No matter how much she rested, it was still not enough. Iso looked at her carefully and noticed the wound still needed care, so she shouldn't move much to regain strength. Noticing the object in his hand, she froze for a moment. Could it be some kind of magic? Magic, although for him, it was something very simple. He handed her the dish. Knowing that rest is important, he understood just as well that real food is no less necessary. She took it without hesitation. The dish consisted of stewed meat and vegetables. Iso was not particularly skilled in cooking, and this was the best he could manage at all. Even in this new world, he clearly felt, without money you can't buy food, firewood, or materials for blacksmithing. The next day, the knives were already on. Finally, everything was ready. He called Samkia. She agreed to give it to the system. She herself did not know if she could help with forging, but Iso asked only one thing to check how the knives cut, and pointed to the first one, ordering her to try. She took the knife and began cutting vegetables. As soon as the blade passed through, she was overwhelmed with impression. Iso then ordered her to try the next knife, and she got to work. She handled it just as well. Again, she cut cleanly, and she was even more surprised. Iso noticed from behind that the second knife made cutting easier, and this difference threw her off track. He became alert. The blade seemed to cut too easily. Then he lifted it with his hand and brought it to the last knife. Let her try. the one he considered the most important. She gathered herself and made the cut. She was clearly shocked at how it turned out, easy, without resistance. Iso then made her try to pull it out. Samia froze in confusion. She did not immediately understand what had happened, and Iso instantly asked her to calm down. He already understood holding the knife in such a state was dangerous. She apologized, and Iso waved his hand, admitting that he himself had not explained everything properly in advance. This confirmed his suspicions. The cheat he was given raised him to the level of a first-class blacksmith, and he began to think, if he wants to sell his work, he will have to carefully consider how to present and package it. Samia immediately became interested in the knife. A spark lit up in her eyes. It would definitely be suitable for hunting. Iso saw nothing wrong with this and would gladly give it to her. She reacted instantly and vividly. It was clear she liked the idea. Iso did not. He did not make a tragedy out of it. The shorter version suited him perfectly, and he was going to make a sheath for the knife that would take some time. When everything was settled, she returned to bed and sank back into rest. Since then, a clear plan began to form in Iso about what to do next. By slightly improving the quality, he could produce more knives already suitable for sale, and from his reactions, it was clear he could precisely feel what level of quality would come out. Work the first step, make even more knives and household tools, then sell them to support himself. He heard, beyond the forest, there was a small town where a lively market bustled on weekends. And from this, his blacksmith life began in his heart. After bandaging the wound, Samia was beaming with gratitude. Iso took a liking to her and asked how she was. She replied that she was not yet ready for hunting, but already felt much better than before. Then Iso suggested to set off to the city that day. A week had already passed since he started making knives, so he even managed to craft several other tools. As soon as they gathered enough items, they set off to sell them. He needed a standard version of his knife, model number 1. It could be mass-produced because it was made quickly and without unnecessary difficulties. By that moment, Samia had almost completely recovered. They even started going for walks together, and during them, she willingly shared knowledge about the forest and its ecology. Iso combined this with what he was given, and thanks to this, he began to better understand everything around him. He was afraid of encountering dangerous animals, wolves or wild boars, but no one appeared. Samia believed this happened because Iso radiated such a strong presence that it drove away these threats. But Iso still found it hard to fully accept this. After all, she was stronger. In his thoughts he felt it. Even without fully realizing the limits of his own strength, he knew there were definitely creatures in the forest far more dangerous than him. His path lasted almost 2 hours on foot through the forest to get to the main road and another hour from there to reach the town. Probably, luck was on their side, because some eel turned out to be a werebeast. On the way they did not encounter any dangerous creatures or bandits. Later Samia nodded forward and pointed to the town that appeared ahead. Just beyond the walls, a bazaar spread out. It was the market they were heading to. Iso was burning with the idea of opening a small business outside the city walls. He understood if he settled here, he would no longer have to worry about entrance or exit holes. As soon as they approached, a man nearby called out to them. They turned around and saw it was a guard. He approached and began questioning. Iso answered calmly and collectedly, just as he had gained experience over years of interacting with people. The guard noticed he had not seen them here before and asked what their purpose was. Iso introduced himself as a blacksmith who was going to sell knives at the market. Then the guard asked to inspect one. Iso agreed without hesitation, and then a careful inspection of the blade. It was already late, so the guard did not notice anything suspicious. Iso and Samia moved on, but the guard warned once more, do not look for trouble. Entering the market, they paid a silver coin and received a stall with permission to trade. Places were allocated on a first-come, first-served basis. As they walked through the market, Iso noticed all the good spots were already taken. Then Samia pointed to another corner and suggested trying there. When he set everything up, Iso finally felt every item was in its place. This place turned out to be quite decent, and Samia immediately noticed it. That day Iso touched her, and she responded with a gentle smile. 2 hours passed, and they still hadn't sold anything. Iso persistently called people, even demonstrated the goods, but it was all in vain. In his thoughts, he honestly admitted, his experience as a programmer hadn't taught him how to sell. A familiar voice broke the silence and asked how things were going. It was a guard. Iso had already come to terms with defeat, so he smiled at the humor in his own inability to sell anything. but the guard suddenly became interested in buying a knife. Iso was caught off guard by this. The guard said that those knives had really impressed him before, and when his own broke, he asked for a replacement. Iso accepted everything and handed him a knife. Bigard examined the item, squinted with satisfaction, and asked about the price. Iso replied, 5 silver coins. Bigard grimaced in surprise and clarified if that was really the price. Iso had already discussed the price with Samia, and they agreed that if it was set too high it could cause problems. The guard handed over 5 silver coins, and Iso sincerely thanked him. For the first time in his life, he earned money from something he created himself. Before leaving, the guard finally said, if the blade proves itself well, he will recommend it to his colleagues. Iso was confident in the quality of his own work. The guard walked away. Samia looked at him and wondered if he was truly satisfied. Iso replied with quiet pride for what he had done. Another hour passed, 3 in total, and there were still no new buyers. I began to think that maybe people there simply did not need household tools. He decided it was time to pack up and go home. Just as they were about to leave, a voice sounded, "Are you closing already?" When they turned around. Turning around, they saw a squad of guards approaching them. Iso was surprised. They had caused no trouble. The senior guard stepped forward and sharply asked if this was really Iso's stall before him, and if he was the one who sold a knife to a guard named Marius. Iso tried to explain. Probably it was that younger guard seen earlier, and this seemed to confirm the whole situation. The senior guard. Underguard's eyes flashed. He asked if there were any knives left. Iso, although not expecting such a turn, displayed the rest of his goods, and the guard, without hesitation, decided to buy everything. The sudden decision shocked Iso. Other guards said that during the break Marius proudly showed off his new knife, so they came to see it themselves. They insisted that the blades be of the same quality. Iso quickly calculated the sum for 8 knives. It came to 40 silver coins. The guards, impressed by the sharpness of the blades, immediately bought them. Later, as they were returning through the forest, Samia sighed with relief. They managed to sell everything. Iso agreed and sincerely thanked her for the help that day. Their goods were sold out to the last, so he understood. It would take a little more time before he could make enough again to replenish the stock. He grew confident he could already do more than simple repairs and small orders. So he set a new goal for himself, to forge a long sword, and decided that if he could negotiate with a traveling merchant, he could expand the range of his goods. It was then that Iso realized he needed to test the agricultural tools and axes he had created himself. And at that very moment he understood. Samia also needed a separate room. In the house, Samia asked with interest if he could make arrowheads, and Iso immediately realized she wanted them for hunting as soon as she fully recovered. She liked the same feeling of being able to use equipment similar to what he himself made. Iso agreed and decided to make them for her, and Samia was clearly delighted. After some time, Iso gathered himself and again took up making knives that day. After this, he was going to start making arrowheads. First, he molded forms from wood and clay, and then they poured molten steel into them and did not rush, patiently waited for it to cool. He turned to Samia for help. She sharpened the blades and as soon as they were ready, attached them to the handles. At the same time, Iso was crafting a large saw for cutting firewood and again started reworking the axe, which he had previously tried to sell. In a cramped chamber, he carved teeth for patients who needed a saw, and this work kept him busy all day long. The next day, Iso went outside and froze, standing facing the tree. He raised the axe and swung it. He made one wild swing to his surprise. Surprisingly, the tree creaked, and with one blow, half of it fell and he and Samia stood frozen in confusion. When Iso looked at the axe in his hand, he involuntarily thought about its power. He realized that if he was not careful, this new life would end as quickly as the previous one. Then they took on the fallen tree. They chopped it into smaller pieces with the axe. Iso shouted to Samia, insistently reminding, "Do not do anything." He asked her not to overexert herself. She had not fully recovered yet, so they continued working side by side, and then took a large saw and dragged it back and forth, cutting the wood. But when they got to work, Iso suddenly felt surprised. The resistance was too soft, as if he was cutting something different than expected, and much easier. Samia also noticed something strange. It even brought a smile. She found it amusing. Iso warned her to be careful because the tension made the body tremble. When it was all over, Iso smiled. It went flawlessly, and at that pace he was sure they would finish everything by the end of the day. Samia noticed, such work usually takes much longer, but with Iso's tools everything moved strikingly fast. She couldn't tear herself away from his incredible equipment. Iso realized the skill to create such tools came from the knowledge invested in him like a cheat received in a second life. But he did not intend to rely only on this bonus. He wanted to grow by his own strength and at the same time remained grateful for the chance to start with such gifts. In his thoughts, he always felt as if here he was a guest. So he finally decided to truly use his abilities, to live a peaceful life and never abuse the power given to him. That night, Samia noticed Iso was still working. She approached him and immediately caught his attention. Her thoughts again covered what he had just confessed. Earlier, he already said that he did not live here at first. Iso admitted this earlier, and now she wondered, will he continue to stay here? Let's go, judging by everything, he has already decided everything. She was replaying in her mind the events since she arrived here. Despite the injury that limited her abilities, she still found joy in helping him. Over food, conversations were lively and fascinating, and walks together were exactly what she eagerly awaited. She was most drawn to watching him work, catching that concentration with which he created with his hands, and she definitely took all this into account. She suddenly wondered, would it be okay if they continued to live together? The weather, Iso had already decided to stay in this place, and with this decision, another question arose. Would she be truly comfortable here? Her reaction said it all by itself. She was more than ready, admiration shone through every word of her gratitude. Then Iso finished the night work and handed her the arrowhead she had asked for. Gradually, Iso began carving. He tried to fit into this world. With every small choice today and tomorrow, he outlined the life he was going to build and clung to the hope that this would be the beginning of many calm and pleasant moments ahead. Meanwhile, in a bar in some city, a man was happily telling that he bought a knife from Iso. His companion stood nearby, watching where Iso went and calculating when he would return, already planning to buy the same one next time. At that time, very close by, a woman overheard their conversation. She stepped forward abruptly and approached them and asked to see the knife they were talking about. Iso handed Samia a lunchbox full of bread and dried meat, and with concern reminded her she had just recovered, so at the slightest danger she must return immediately. She understood and moved on, while Iso watched her with a sincere wish for her safety. After that, Iso got back to work. First of all, he wanted to replenish his inventory. From then on, he decided not to stop at knives. He started forging long swords as well. At first, he checked the mold he had prepared earlier to make sure it had dried well. When he was convinced, he cut the mold in half and took out its inner part. Then he again joined the two outer halves, placed them in a barrel of sand, and poured molten iron into it. When the metal cooled, he removed the clay and pulled out the sword, then ground down the rough edges and hammered them to even out the contours. After that, while the blade was still hot, he finally shaped it, bringing the form to the desired one. When the metal became soft and manageable after annealing, he sharply sharpened the blade, installed the guard, and wrapped the handle with leather, and then, despite the simplicity, crafted a wooden sheath to complete the piece. Usually such work was done by several people in turn, but with a cheat given to him by the watch cat Iso, he managed alone in his workshop. He finished the main part of the creation quickly and carefully, engraving his signature mark on the sword pommel. One more moment, and with the final touch, the work was finally ready. He took the design as a model from a cute cat he once saw on social media, and now the first stage of his long sword was already behind. Next, for several days in a row, he prepared to release simpler models of swords and knives in large batches of lower rank. Even though these were his own creations, he did not stop, carefully polishing every detail to a shine. Suddenly, Iso found himself with the sword in his hands, and like a true hero from an epic, froze in a battle pose. As soon as Samia returned home, he immediately came into view, and Iso, involuntarily, became a little embarrassed. He did not explain anything, only nodded and made it clear with a look, as if to say, she has returned. Cheeks in Samia barely flushed with heat, and Iso immediately noticed it. A barely noticeable joy flickered on her face. Suddenly he realized, when someone is waiting at home, it's a completely different comfort, and Samia felt the same. It was happiness the kind Iso had never known in his previous life. Then he asked about her walk, and Samia confirmed she had successfully hunted a tree deer. She had already prepared everything, removed the entrails, and threw them into the lake so that in the morning they would attract prey. Iso understood everything, then shifted his gaze, assessing how exactly the knife and arrows had worked. Armed, Samia felt this weapon was truly very effective. The next morning, she and Iso returned with the tree deer. Samia had hunted it, and immediately began to dissect the prey. They cut the carcass, Thanks to her skill with the knife and the sharpness of the blade, they removed the skin almost instantly, then immediately sliced the meat into portions. As soon as all the meat was cut, but Iso immediately noticed, the sharpness of the knife made the process almost too easy. The further they advanced, the more the pieces of meat looked like something he was already used to. Iso wondered exactly how. In his previous world, the sweetness of fruits and how easy it was to eat cooked meat there, all of this did not come from nowhere. It was the result of people's work behind the scenes. While they were frying some of the meat, Iso thought aloud, "What happened to the organs cut out from the deer?" Samia answered, "If the remains were left in the forest, the wolves would eat them themselves." Iso perceived this as a simple return of what was left back to the forest. When he ate, the taste overwhelmed him completely. He had not felt such pleasure from fresh meat for a long time. Moment by moment, Samia slipped into the next hunt. Catching a bird would be a great idea, especially since fried leafy birds were famous for their taste. Iso liked this thought. From Samia's reaction, he was convinced that eating well was truly an important part of a slow and measured life. Some time later, they brought the rest of the meat into the workshop, began preparing it for drying, and Iso was already planning to start smoking it soon. The next morning, when Samia decided to take a break from hunting, Iso asked her to help him with work. She began shaping the form, and suddenly became completely absorbed in the process itself. Thanks to her, Iso again managed to accumulate enough supplies to take them to the city. As soon as they arrived, Marius greeted them. "We haven't seen them for a long time, and the heart had already begun to worry," Iso explained. Due to previous demand, his supplies were completely exhausted. Soon Marius noticed. This time Iso brought swords. A man nearby became interested and said that maybe he would come back later to take a closer look. Setting up his stall, Iso noticed the neighboring seller and nodded to him, as if to say, today they would have to work side by side. That man took it without any problems. Iso asked Samia to use this time to buy groceries, primarily salt and barley. Finally, she agreed and set off to take care of everything. And as soon as everything was ready, Iso finished setting up the stall and quietly, without haste, began trading. Some time later, a man approached Iso and became interested in these varieties. Iso stretched out his handand. The man pulled his out. First, he examined the blade, then pulled it out of the sheath and scrutinized it carefully. The man immediately felt, the blade is of genuine quality. Then he decided to buy 4 varieties. This surprised Iso. He became confused and began to doubt whether that man was really sure. The man stated that he was a traveling merchant. He would keep only one for himself and take the rest further to sell. Iso immediately realized what was happening and seized the chance. A thought flashed in his mind. This way he would take his business beyond the town, letting others sell his works in different places. When the deal was completed, Iso pondered the idea of traveling merchants. Suddenly it snapped in his head. As soon as he saves enough money, it would be wonderful to go on a trip together with Samia someday. Soon Marius arrived together with several comrades. Thanks to their purchases, Iso was able to sell all his usual long shorts. Only higher-class models remained, those he had not yet managed to display. When Samia returned, Iso told her that the knives had already been sold. While they were negotiating, she noticed a person nearby who kept looking around. His figure sharply stood out, a dwarf, and it was strange for Samia to see him in these parts. Iso immediately recognized the hint about dwarfs. From his knowledge, he recalled that they were a people of shorter stature. Samia decided that they were hardly visible there. Even for her, most meetings lasted briefly. Usually, she found them in the forest and escorted them to the main road. Soon the gnome spotted both of them and quickly moved to meet them. He stubbornly stared at Iso, trying to find out if he was the one who made the knives used by the guards. Iso, without hesitation for a second, confirmed, yes, he was the one who forged them. The gnome noticed the knife on the table, and his eyes lit up with curiosity. Iso allowed her to come closer and take a better look. She grabbed the knife and immediately tested it, carefully examining how it lay in her hand and what it was capable of. After that, she wanted to see the best thing he had. In the warehouse, unlike the mass-produced ordinary models made in much larger quantities, this high-class specimen was set aside. Iso deliberately hid it to sell only to someone she deemed worthy. The gnome examined the knife and, convinced there must be something better somewhere, waited hopefully. Iso raised the sword and held it out to the gnome for inspection as soon as he recognized. She was clearly surprised by this. She carefully wiped the blade with a piece of cloth and it gleamed. Although she was small, her movements were precise and even, as if she perfectly knew how to handle such things. She continued examining every detail, meticulously testing the sword, while Iso and Samia stood aside, merely watching without intervening. She stared, and over time, it became clear that she had been examining his blade for quite a while. Meanwhile, other clients were coming and going, and she did not take her eyes off the steel, and Iso began to wonder how much longer she would need to finish everything. In the end, she returned the sword. Iso was barely disappointed. He hoped she would buy it, but still accepted it back without any problems. But instead of leaving, the gnome spoke up with an unexpected request. Iso became completely confused as soon as she asked. She took a step forward, and everyone around instantly shifted their gazes to her. Why, without hesitation, she dropped to her knees and asked to become his apprentice. Her appearance on her knees completely stunned Iso. In a few moments, Iso, Samia, and the dwarves sat together. The dwarf woman introduced herself as Rika Moritz and sincerely said that she was pleased to meet them. Even before Iso could pull back, she had already fallen face down in the middle of a crowded street. To carefully listen to her explanation, they moved to a quieter corner. Iso did not want Samia to attract the public's attention in vain. Samia considered this name unusual and wondered if it was a surname. And later it turned out, Moritz is not a surname, but the name of a community of blacksmiths to which she belonged. Among the dwarves, it was customary to gather in several families and set up a joint forge, and they called themselves by the name of that workshop. In this sense, she was known as Rika Moritz from the Moritz Forge, and Iso immediately understood this. Next, Iso said his names, and among them was Samia. She warmly greeted her in response. It was Rika's turn. She looked intently at the man, guessed where he was from, and decided it seemed from the north. Iso did not object. Yes, there was truth in that. Only now, due to circumstances, he worked as a blacksmith in the Black Forest. At first, Rika pondered. Why before coming here had she never seen a blacksmith of such a level, and immediately understood that the reason was precisely in his origin. Iso tried to understand what exactly she meant when she suddenly decided to make him her apprentice. According to explanations, dwarves usually leave their native forge for several years to occasionally hone their skills. Riku and her brothers also took the same path. They set out from the workshop to travel, moving from one forge to another, visiting different masters and learning until their skills became more precise. They became apprentices to experienced blacksmith masters and gradually increased their own craftsmanship. Then they returned to their native workshop with new knowledge and creations and again set out to where they once learned. This cycle was an integral part of dwarves' lives. Iso could not bear the doubts. Could it be that they do not care at all that their techniques might pass to others? According to Riku, it is a true honor for a forge when a dwarf goes as an apprentice to another master. His growth, knowledge, and techniques that he brings back will ultimately strengthen the forge itself. She did it herself. Riku pulled out a knife and suddenly remembered that a few days ago, just after arriving in the city, she saw this very knife in the hands of the guards. Iso recognized it. It was one of the blades he had forged. This connection finally confirmed everything for her. Since Iso had no dealings with city blacksmiths and sold his products only at the market, Riku ordered her brothers to move on, and she herself stayed to wait until he returned. Iso thought about the brothers, and suddenly everything came together. They had already moved on, looking for their masters with whom they would now study. He wondered what will happen if he refuses her. It seems she is simply moving on to find a new master. He could not shake the thought of the young girl traveling alone on uncertain paths. Each time she reminded him of all the risks. Nearby, Samia quietly watched Riku without saying a word. That's all. Iso was tormented noticing naivety here, but eventually decided to make her his apprentice. But Samia absolutely did not agree with this decision. Yet Iso immediately set conditions. 4 demands had to be accepted, and Riku agreed to listen to them without hesitation. The first rule was simple and clear. He would not tolerate any behavior that ignored personal safety. From then on, he would no longer allow such recklessness. He accepted this without resistance. The second condition was as follows. There were not enough rooms, so renovations would have to be done. Thirdly, besides blacksmithing, she would also take on household chores. The fourth was that very formal S. Ordinary words suddenly became unnecessary. He would call her Riku, and she would simply call him Izu. Rika found it hard to accept this, and instead chose to address him as her master. From her perspective as an apprentice, it was natural to show proper respect to the one who taught her, and at that moment Samia laughed. Laughter, she reacted to the situation in her own way, and others each experienced it differently. After some time, they reached the destination. Iso explained, here is both their home and workshop. Riku involuntarily froze, impressed by what she saw. Iso looked at how she felt and immediately saw. The luggage was too much for her, and the forest path was not one of those that come easily. Yet Riku managed. Her strong body made the journey easier than she herself expected. He ordered her to gather his things and tidy herself up. At the same time, he sincerely thanked Samia, admitting, "The path through the forest is exactly what will help Riku walk more easily." Samia reluctantly agreed with him. Later, the three of them sat down to have dinner. Then Iso spoke again about the place. Space is lacking, so for now Riku and Samio will have to share a bedroom. Rika hesitated. She felt that such an arrangement might be inappropriate, and since she had brought camping gear, she thought of spending the night outside and leaving the bedroom to the others. Iso saw no problem with this. He hardly needed the bedroom, so nothing would really change for him. Riku found this strange, and he began to puzzle over how it is even possible to live together. The unwelcome assumption instantly threw Iso and Samia off balance. They were clearly confused. When she started talking about the need to move forward, Samia sharply rejected this idea and immediately made it clear. Their relationship was not at all what they had imagined. Confirmed, Riku looked at the situation in a new way and suddenly realized that she had misunderstood everything. Meanwhile, Iso was confused by the very thought and could no longer understand how such a relationship could even work in this world. Iso decided that guessing was enough, so as always, explaining it in his own way, he stated, "There is nothing between him and Samia, at least for now." The phrase "for now" suddenly struck Samia. The guard stepped away, leaving her a little embarrassed. Iso noticed her reaction and quickly checked if everything was all right, and Riku saw the same thing differently. For him, it was a group of people living together like one family in the same workshop. The word family hung in Iso's thoughts. Holding that thought in his mind, he agreed. It also lightly patted something, like E, on the head. Then he got back to practical matters and said directly, "While the house is under renovation, we will sleep as previously agreed. He and the owner are responsible, so his word is final," and they both agreed to this. The next day they started the renovation, sanding the previously prepared wood and simultaneously digging holes for the posts, because Samia went hunting, and the work was left to Iso and Riku. However, Riku was already used to such work, probably from the gnome forge, and together with Iso's enhanced strength, everything went very quickly. Finally, after some time, Samia returned from hunting. Iso greeted her on her return and asked how everything went. She had taken down a large wooden deer. Samia's gaze slid further, and Riku, gathered at work, she immediately noticed. Riku was sorting firewood and taking an axe, chopped the wood with stunning ease as if it were much softer, and the sharpness of the tool impressed her. Samia instantly recognized this reaction. It stuck in her memory how she first felt the same just seeing it, and then it seemed a little strange to her. Iso listened and was a bit surprised. Samia had described it like this before, but he did not stop and explained that the blacksmith work would start the next day and would go alongside the ongoing repairs. It was clear from Riku, this plan clearly fired him up. Before sunset, they prepared a mold for a less powerful type of blade, progressing step by step. The next morning, the three returned with the prey that Samia had hunted and immediately set about dismantling it. After a short rest, they took up the blacksmith work again. The molten metal was poured into the mold, prepared the day before. As expected, Riku quickly adapted, gaining experience right during the work. Her hands moved without hesitation, and her pace was simultaneously effective and at the same time steady. After a light lunch break at noon, they resumed work fully focused on making knives. And there was only one single problem. The techniques that Iso used were kept on a cheat sheet he received. Teaching such was extremely difficult. Riku loudly emphasized this, addressing Iso. Before him, Iso did not try to evade and told the truth. He was taking a student for the first time and did not know how to teach properly. Riku immediately understood this. She immediately understood and agreed to learn just by observing. She was fully focused, did not look away for a second, and decided not to miss a single, even the smallest, movement. At first, they took on a knife that was to be mass-produced, simple, for everyday use. Used when Iso forged the metal, it recovered. Riku watched carefully, studying each of her steps. When the blade was heated and dipped into water, it sharply hissed. Iso explained. Only sharpening and polishing the edge to a shine remained. Then he looked at Riku and asked with interest if she had noticed anything while watching him. Riku noticed several things in his sensations. She realized that Iso seemed to be able to determine the state of the iron just by the sound. Yet he did not give all his strength. She also noticed that long sword he showed earlier was completely unlike the knife he was forging now. Iso explained, "This is a knife for daily use, and he wanted her to focus on how to make something similar, so she had to watch the process carefully before starting the work herself. After this, he asked her to try to create one. Rick began the process with iron precision. Iso watched and could not believe his eyes. She worked so skillfully, although she had seen him in action only once. After some time, Rick finished her N. He took the knife and handed it to her so she could examine it. She took the knife and carefully examined the result. Iso quietly thought. The work before him was impressive. It was in no way inferior to the usual model he had made earlier. Iso noticed, although Rick did well, there were moments when sparks flared too strongly, and this clearly indicated there was still room to grow. But despite everything, he was confident. Over time, she would be able to forge something on the level of that long sword he had seen earlier. These words ignited enthusiasm in Rick, and she decided to fully dedicate herself to improving her skills. Iso wanted again to visually demonstrate the entire process, this time every step from start to finish so she could see everything clearly. Obviously, when you watch someone take the iron in their hands for the first time, somewhere in the middle of the moment, it suddenly comes together in your head. Thanks to the cheat he had, he instinctively knew how to handle the metal, when to take a step, where to strike, what temperature and hardness were needed. Everything came naturally. Therefore, he could forge precisely, without hesitation, straight from thought, without losing quality. And he felt it just as clearly. This ability is born neither from effort nor from training. Instead, Riku and other craftsmen relied only on their own strength. From the very beginning, they forged mastery through apprenticeship and endless practice, step by step accumulating experience. Iso felt that it would be presumptuous to try to teach what he himself had never truly learned in the traditional way. So he decided simply to let her observe, understand, and extract everything she was capable of from it. Riku patiently waited while he worked. As soon as the master finished grinding, he moved on, and all the work required silence and concentration. The knife was in hand, the work was done, so Iso acknowledged her patience. Riku later examined the finished product. On the blade, judging by what she saw, it was much better than what usually happened. It was not just craftsmanship, the level of mastery in the work was striking. It was made so skillfully that even among dwarves, such a thing is extremely rare. Iso decided to give the knife to Riku, and Riku was embarrassed because she was not sure if it was really appropriate. For him, a blade of that level is not something easily sold, and now that she had become his apprentice, she herself became part of his household. Riku accepted this with gratitude and firmly resolved to continue learning and training to someday become just as skilled. From Iso came a casual response to encourage and not give up. Don't give up, keep going. This is exactly what happened. Samia turned around and said that the meat had been processed, and the skins were already prepared for tanning. She looked aside and saw Riku also had a knife, and this surprise revealed everything. It became clear that he had received one too. Later they went outside, where food was already being prepared. They were seated in pairs, and three sat to eat together. During the meal, Riku couldn't hold back and gave in to curiosity about Iso's abilities. Can he use magic? And it quickly became clear his magic relies only on simple skills. Samia said that being able to forge and possess magic at the same time is truly impressive. And she also added that Iso has a surname. Her gaze fixed on him. She froze and held her breath, waiting for him to say her name, and as soon as it happened, Tanya. Riku repeated this to herself, and over time began to associate it more and more with herself. But this confused Samia. The connection was established too quickly. But for Riku it was quite obvious. As an apprentice, she now worked at the same forge, and this name only more clearly distinguished her place. She guessed that being under Iso meant she would be called Riku Tanya. Iso caught her thoughts and agreed. She came to exactly that conclusion. Riku suddenly remembered she had never introduced herself with a surname before, and then she thought, if it is necessary, a blacksmith can simply be named after Iso. And Samia almost instantly picked up the idea and also began to identify herself with this name. Iso felt a strange, slightly awkward embarrassment. The very thought that others would say his name so openly was unusual for him. And then Samia said that it would be unfair if only one of them used his name. And she wondered if she should change her own in the same way. Well, Iso quietly pondered and remembered. He was the first to invite Samia to live with him. In the end, he agreed. If they considered themselves a family, there was no longer any reason to deny the real cause. Samia and Riku instantly lit up with happiness, and everything seemed to settle by itself. For Iso, who had previously considered himself only a temporary guest in this world, it was a small but still important change. Before, he lived only by his work and never thought he would leave anything behind. Now something more appeared, something that would remain in him. But he could not ignore the insight that came with Riku's reaction to his work. The abilities given to him by the cheat were not ordinary for this world at all. Even in his past life, the level of sharpness and cutting power he could now reproduce was far from ordinary. Moreover, Samya became his apprentice, and more people gradually began to gather around him. Riku rejoined and got down to work seriously, and Samya extended a helping hand, so Iso finally got more time to focus on crafting. As a result, the overall efficiency of the ISO workshop noticeably increased. Every week Iso went to the market in the neighboring town to sell his creations. During a routine visit, he suddenly recognized a familiar face somewhere in the crowd. Outside, Marius explained that recently, as soon as people came to inquire about Iso's items, the requests kept increasing more and more. I understood it this way. This surge in demand was largely driven by the people nearby. They were enthusiastically talking about his works. The traveling merchant, smiling, even hinted, later he would definitely buy something. Iso had knives, long swords, and spears. Each of these types had its own rank. A head was a universal type that he could produce in large quantities, the general mode. It was affordable and so sharp that even ordinary households bought it. Next, a higher performance knife for those skilled with sharp tools. It was called the luxury model. The price remained moderate, experienced users liked it, and there was a feeling sales would soar even higher if ISO established a connection with a wholesaler. However, beyond that, there was another hidden category. It was not displayed in the showcase. ISO revealed it only after thoroughly checking the buyer's intentions, and it was called Stipulative Class Mode. This mode was created by nurturing the full power of a unique ability given to him by WatchCap. It operated outside the norm, and because of this, it became too dangerous, so entrusting it to just anyone was impossible. For now, Iso quietly worried. The thought that he might never sell his goods tightened his chest, and he did not know what he would do next. After some time, Rucky approached him and said that everything had been sold out again. Again, Iso had to admit, he understood that those who bought his things had probably already told others about them. Then Riku suggested an idea. Maybe it was time to replenish the supplies of iron, charcoal, and clay. Somya immediately asked if there was a supplier of these materials, and Iso confirmed. There was. The Watchcat had organized both the house and the workshop, so even though Iso had enough food and materials, the supplies expected were gradually dwindling. Iso tried on one thought in his mind, to ask for help from a traveling merchant. As if by someone's call, a seller appeared in the doorway. He saw that Iso was still there, and hearing him say he would leave for the day, sprang up and hurried to him. Everything was done on time exactly when needed. Iso sincerely thanked him. The goods were sold out again, mostly because the trader ordered large batches. The shopkeeper agreed. Mostly people said that Iso's products had already become popular among buyers, and they really wanted to take more. Iso shuddered as soon as he realized. If he had known earlier, he could have brought those additional 10 items he made at night. The seller noticed Iso was not only a skilled craftsman, but also a person who calculated everything in advance. Iso, in response, recalled how he usually worked with iron and kept an eye on silver. The seller decided that this was exactly how it should be, so he announced a new plan. They decided to open a proper shop in the city, rather than limiting themselves to trading only at the market. Iso smiled and nodded approvingly. The merchant thanked him and asked for his advice. Previously, he had dealt with a variety of goods thanks to connections in different places. But now, he was going to open a shop right here, taking advantage of the fact that within the walls of the new settlement, there were almost no restrictions on what could be sold. Iso became interested in this offer, and then the merchant stated that the shop could trade in cutlery and weapons, which Iso also makes. Iso doubted, is such an arrangement really acceptable? The seller confirmed without any hesitation. He already knew the quality of Iso's longswords. Iso briefly wondered if the seller himself used them, and realized income from the free market is unstable, and at the same time, more and more people began to look for him. They saw his goods in the hands of others. Then Iso admitted that he himself hoped to negotiate with a wholesaler. He implied, if the merchant agrees, he will entrust him with this role. The merchant gladly agreed and sincerely thanked him. With his characteristic Camillo manner, he introduced himself and said he was glad to meet Iso. Iso also gave his name and added that for certain reasons he lives in the Black Forest. After that, they firmly shook hands. Camillo was noticeably surprised to hear this and said, living in such a place is really strange. Examining Iso's abilities, he realized, if he wished, he could settle somewhere else. He said that for people like him, it is not uncommon to be accompanied by a beastman and a gnome. Next, Iso got down to business. He talked about the schedule, explained that wholesale deals would most likely take place about once a week, and asked if it was possible to notify Camillo in advance about possible delays. Camillo agreed to this arrangement. In a moment, Iso remembered another concern and voiced it before finally putting an end to the negotiations. He said that he was almost out of various materials and asked if there was a place where he could get them. Camillo offered to take care of the purchases himself instead of him. Iso sighed with relief. He immediately understood how this would help, so he entrusted Camillo with the matter. Camillo clarified that the cost of the materials would be deducted from the price of Iso's goods. Iso accepted the condition, and they sealed the deal with a fist bump. Iso felt a pleasant satisfaction. Now he had a reliable way to replenish his materials. Camillo added that the shop would open next week and asked Iso to bring his goods when he came. After that, he said goodbye. And so, in a week, here in front of the shop stood Riku, Samia, and Iso. She looked at the building with obvious surprise. It was so large that it even impressed Samia. As soon as they went inside, they were overwhelmed by the variety of goods. Iso was glowing with excitement. Rookie looked at some very rare spices, and Samia caught an unusual anxious smell in the air. On the wall, like a real exhibition, hung a knife, a dagger, and a sword. As soon as they appeared before their eyes like that, it immediately became clear. They were really going to be sold, and both Samia and Iso felt it intuitively. Camillo immediately noticed that Iso had arrived and led them upstairs. In a moment, everyone settled down, and Iso said that he had brought knives, a long sword and short swords for today, while casually asking how many to take. Camillo accepted all their requests without any hesitation, and this unexpectedly threw Iso off balance. He explained sales were going well. Iso agreed, but noted that the shop was quite large, so he involuntarily wondered whether the name Camillo had become known as a traveling merchant. Camillo said that his success was in a simple approach. He sells goods without any distinction to ordinary townsfolk, travelers, and professionals alike. Iso compared this system to something like a supermarket. Then Camillo brought up a new matter. He recalled the request to order a sword that Iso would forge. When this request first came up, he did not know how to respond. Iso considered the idea of taking individual orders. He understood that he wanted to carefully choose who would work on his pieces, but at the same time knew if he completely refused them, progress would not begin. Camillo asked if he should reject the request. Iso shook his head no. He firmly made it clear. He was not refusing, he just wanted to more wisely choose to whom he would send himself. Camillo suggested, first he would check the skill and character of the requester, and only then inform Iso. Iso agreed that suited him. Then Camillo put forward a condition. The customer must come to his workshop in person. To get there, they would have to pass through the Black Forest, a place where wolves roamed. Whoever overcame this path would reveal what they were capable of. Camillo nodded. The condition was accepted. Regarding the assessment of character, Iso decided to trust Camillo. He named the location of his workshop and ordered to reveal it only to those deemed worthy. Camillo agreed to the arrangement. Then Iso addressed Samia and Riku, briefly apologized, and immediately implemented his decision. Riku said that she had no objections to her master Iso's decision. Samia shared the same opinion, and Iso felt sincere gratitude for their support. Camillo only responded with a quiet smile. Iso asked about the materials, whether they had already been prepared. Camillo confirmed that he had provided a sufficient quantity and led them further inside. They entered the warehouse. Izo noticed it was the same size as the store. Camillo showed these were the supplies. Izo was clearly impressed. He realized all this was gathered in just a week, so with such a stockpile their supplies would last a long time. Camillo assured that with this amount, there would be no need to worry immediately about replenishing supplies. Then he leaned closer and quietly named the price. Iso reacted with surprise at how low it was. It turned out to be about a quarter of the usual wholesale price. He doubted whether it was normal for Camillo to offer such a margin, but the latter remained with a cold, calm expression, as if to say, even at this rate, there was still profit. That's it. Iso accepted the explanation and decided not to hold back. He was already calculating how to transport the materials. The quantities were enough to carry by hand, although it would be more convenient with an assistant. He asked if Camillo dealt with carts, and he replied no. But remember that unused cart he was going to throw away. If repaired, it would still serve well. Iso agreed to this. They asked how much it would cost. Camillo gave it for free, and Iso was stunned with surprise. Camillo said that he didn't need the thing, but taking care of a regular client was, as he said, normal. ISO doubted, was this really fair? And he had no idea what he had done to deserve such treatment. A quiet thought flashed. Could there be something more behind that gesture? Camillo explained that ISO looked like a supplier with great potential for the future. Having a person who could supply quality goods at a reasonable price was exactly what now weighed like gold. He perceived it as an investment in goodwill. ISO acknowledged this and sincerely thanked Camillo for the help. Camillo accepted the thanks without any hesitation. After some time, all the materials finally ended up on the cart, and they were already ready to head home. ISO thought carrying this on the main road would be a bit inconvenient, but he believed it would still get back in the same condition it was in. Reiki agreed with this. ISO decided to patch the road a bit, and Rookie noticed that this would make it easier for those asking for things to reach them. ISO agreed, because it sounded quite logical. At that moment, something suddenly pulled away part of my attention. She recognized in this the sign of the forest wolf and ordered to stop and wait a little. Meanwhile, ISO noticed. Since that morning everything remained unchanged, the wolves looked more restless than usual. Mia suddenly realized the time had come when they were supposed to have babies. She guessed in another month they would probably start seeing wolf pups. ISO briefly imagined what these young wolves would grow into. The recruit noticed that the wolves in this forest were strangely quiet and wondered, do they even attack people at all? People, Samia explained that there was plenty of prey in the forest, wood deer and grass rabbits, so the wolves did not have to look for food elsewhere. She added, as long as ISO and she are nearby, hardly anyone would dare to mess with the strong ones. This, ISO already understood. The strong are rarely taken as prey. Rick pondered what would happen to someone weaker if they were attacked, and concluded, wandering alone is dangerous. Home, Samia said directly that every time Ruki leaves the house, it is better for him to go together either with her or with ISO. Samia says that the wolves of this forest are strangely intelligent. Their social behavior is unlike ordinary terrestrial wolves. Wolves, in such regions, they cultivate vigilance and flexibility, perhaps even raise their intelligence to compete with the forest's abundance. And Samia added, besides wolves, sometimes bandits appear even when she and ISO were nearby. Dangerous people still showed up, so one must keep ears alert. She gently rubbed her belly. Suddenly ISO remembered something troubling. A black bear that once attacked Samia was still hiding somewhere in this forest. Even for Samia, a tiger-like beastman, an encounter with such danger. The thought that a dangerous opponent could become a serious threat flashed only for a moment, but his attention immediately shifted. Something rustled nearby, an instinct made him grip the cart tighter. Heavy footsteps approached louder and louder. What appeared was, there was a huge black bear, an impressive, inevitable presence of wild nature. As soon as the stock of materials was replenished, they again began to create new products. ISO reviewed the results and decided that the outcome was quite good. Riku noticed these new things were even better than the previous ones because the materials they obtained were truly high quality. ISO accepts her decision, trusts her assessment, and decides that they need to move forward. They poured ore from Camillo's shop into the magical furnace and smelted it into steel, leaving almost no slag. It caused no delays and did not wear out, so it could be used again and again. The efficiency was impressive, and Riku was still fascinated by how magic works in such processes. From the perspective of things, their workshop was supposed to rely on human labor, but having such a supplier felt almost like an incredible advantage. ISO even felt as if he was about to burst out and apologize to the craftsmen of this world, yet in his soul he sincerely thanked because it gave them to do detailed work even when you are deep in the forest. Several days passed. ISO finally officially recognized they had fulfilled their production quota, and as soon as this happened, ISO finally set about repairing the house. Samia called him right then. ISO immediately focused on her, felt she was about to show something. With a gesture, she made it clear, since he had finished for today, he had to go with her. When Samia announced the result, ISO froze in shock. The house repair was already finished. Even the roof was ready, and everything looked exactly as it should be. ISO sincerely thanked Rick, acknowledging their hard work, and Riku gave Samia all the praise for her efforts. ISO felt guilty realizing that in a week he had done almost nothing for the home. While ISO fully immersed himself in blacksmithing, the repair fell on the shoulders of Samia and Riku. With Riku's experience and Samia's tireless work, everything went smoothly and reliably. Easy? ISO thought that handling everything together was probably incredibly difficult. while Riku believed that they were naturally stronger than humans. Iso sincerely thanked them once again, then said that he asked Camillo to prepare bedding for them next time. After that, he was going to get ready. First, they would take the door, then the bed and the necessary tools. Riku couldn't let go of the question. Could they really install the door in this very room? Iso confirmed that it would be so and asked if everyone agreed. Rika thought, in most cases, if it is not a noble house, doors are only in the guest room or in the room of the head of the family and his or other half, and the rest of the family crams into one single room. Samia admitted that she had no experience living in a real house, so she had nothing to compare it to. Their Iso quietly realized, he speaks, relying on the common sense of his native world. But still, Iso firmly decided, they would have separate rooms, one for the apprentice and one for the family. Samia and Riku agreed with this. Samia then asked if Iso planned to go to the city, and Iso decided not to go this week. Riku realized that today was a day off and began to wonder what to do. Iso answered and calm spread across his face. But without noticing it himself, since Iso found himself in this world, he had not had a proper day of rest even once. To maintain a balance between work and life, they worked without a strict schedule, tirelessly continuing their efforts every day. Fortunately, sales through Camillo's shop were simply wonderful. They did not collect a large sum, but still managed to set aside some of the earnings. That is why Iso decided to retreat and finally allow himself to truly rest for the whole week. While walking, Samia pointed ahead to a spot and suggested stopping right there. Iso looked at him and decided that it was suitable. It seemed quite reasonable to them, so they decided to settle right there. They walked almost an hour from home until they finally reached the river's headwaters. Here it is, the long-awaited slow life, the long-awaited day off. Iso decided to use this time for what he had always dreamed of. He wanted and made a simple fishing rod from natural materials. The thread brought from home and the hook made from a processed rivet turned into a homemade fishing rod. Iso lifted a stone, thinking that bait would surely be underneath. As expected, there were worms. Rumia clearly felt uncomfortable, and Samia was glowing with excitement. Iso quietly watched them. He pondered how differently the two had reacted and noticed how fully each was immersed in the moment. Then they started fishing, and Iso suggested to Samia to let out a little more line. Iso allowed himself to simply breathe in this quiet moment. The weather seemed pleasant without any unnecessary fuss. After exhausting work with almost no breaks, he found himself where he could finally eat properly and sleep. But the habit of constantly pushing himself did not let go, as if even here he was rushing himself and didn't even notice it. Sitting slowly and relaxed like this, he suddenly wondered when he last felt something similar. Soon the fishing rod jerked sharply. Iso asked her not to move at all yet, so the fish would take the bait well. At the most needed moment, he gave the signal. Samia skillfully caught a fish. Iso acknowledged it as a success, and Raki ordered to put the fish on the ground to remove the hook. Iso quietly watched them and noticed. After working together, Rookie started to speak more freely and casually with Samia. It seemed they both truly laughed, sorting through the fish that Samia caught. Noon will come soon. Samia pulled out one fish, Riku two, and Iso caught nothing. A lot, Iso quietly got irritated. In 3 attempts, he pulled out only floating wooden fragments and leaves instead of fish, and Sumi asked if he might be emitting too much deadly intent. Iso did not immediately understand what she meant. A slight confusion flashed across his face. Samia noticed this and explained, fish are living creatures that become wary when they sense something too strong nearby. Iso pondered and decided there was no point in rushing. It was still midday. Soon Samia lay down and yawned. Iso looked at her, and in a moment Riku also relaxed. Both peacefully fell asleep. Iso remained sitting and thought. This was supposed to be just a rest on a day off, no point in chasing results. Time to relax and calm the thoughts. After some time, Samia woke up again and yawned again. Suddenly she realized, since early afternoon she had not managed to catch anything. Soon her thought caught on what distinguishes fishing from hunting. There you cannot set a trap and keep changing places continuously, and that annoyed her. Iso thought about hunting. Then he remembered, during hunting Samia always took out all the entrails, leaving only the heart. He could not get rid of the thought of what happened to that heart. They never returned home. Samia quietly said, she will bury the heart under the ground in the forest. Samia explained, when the soul returns, it sprouts new life, and Iso realized the heart is the soul. A pit, she added that wolves and other beasts came to eat what they did not bury, so some fragments remained nearby. The beasts lurked and watched. Iso froze in thought about this custom of the beast people in the forest, and in the silence it flashed. When will the end finally come to this in those lands? The earth, or maybe his own soul, which came from another world, can also become part of this forest. They moved to another place for fishing, but there the fish did not bite either. The sun was already rolling towards sunset. There was a feeling that it was finally time to give up, but Samia and Riku had caught 3 fish since morning, so each of them was supposed to get exactly 1. And Iso bitterly realized he caught nothing, although this day was supposed to be a rest. And then he felt how his honor hung by a thread, both as the master of the house and as a skilled craftsman. He decided, whatever the result, he would catch at least 1 fish. Samia noticed his determination and smiled. She was pleased that it was so clearly visible on his face. I hesitated whether it was just as obvious, so I felt a little embarrassed. At that moment, someone's eye sensed something is approaching. Iso also noticed this and looked intently at himself. He focused and whispered to himself, "Calm down," because he knew haste would only scare the fish. Timing the moment to the second, he jerked the line and still pulled out 1. Iso lifted the fish, shook it slightly, and a small smile flashed on his face. He was satisfied that he finally caught 1. Samia decided that his reaction was a bit awkward, and Riku thought it was a great result. Although Iso caught little, all 3 sincerely enjoyed this time, finally relaxed, and felt that their outing was over. Time to return home. Iso thought, how will I go back to work again tomorrow? They worked all day both on the craft and on repairing the house. But the heavy burden that always hung over the start of a new workday no longer pressed down. It was then that he suddenly realized he was eagerly awaiting the return to the life of a blacksmith. It was as clear as day. Iso was truly happy with the life he now led in this new world. Later they returned home and arranged a small, cozy celebration. Iso acknowledged the efforts of Samia and Riku. He truly appreciated the work done that day, so at this pace they could rest a little before the next stage of expanding the house. Finally, their home began to take shape. Both Samia and Riku felt a quiet pride and pleasant excitement. A simple window and door were already installed in each newly built room. Similarly, a mattress and bed frame were placed in each room. Samia and Riku already had their own rooms, and Iso rearranged his space. The room where he used to sleep was turned into a guest room and a study at the same time. Thanks to this, they could finally live each separately in their own room. Riku was a little worried. For the first time, she had her own room, and she had not yet gotten used to it. Samia, on the contrary, again immersed her thoughts in the sowing in the field, and Iso was pondering. They decided to try whether they could get seeds during the next visit to Camillo. While the house was being expanded, they simultaneously started clearing and preparing the land nearby for sowing. Until now they had relied on the forest. From there they got meat and nuts, but vegetables still had to be bought. Iso wanted that, if possible, they would grow their own and gradually become more independent. Iso decided the unsold training hoes and sickles they made would finally be useful now they had a real purpose. Riku realized that she would be preparing the field for the first time, and she got excited because Iso knew everything so well. Samia shared the same feeling and noticed Iso seemed to have too broad a worldview. Iso replied without unnecessary words. He felt such emphasis was not needed at all. Everything Iso understood grew from what he learned in the previous world, and from the knowledge he gained with the second chance at life, so for others it seemed quite unusual. Yet Iso suddenly realized, even in that former world, there were many things he simply did not suspect. That night, when Iso was already about to go to sleep, as he was falling asleep, a thought quietly flashed through his mind. It had been a long time since he last slept in a normal bed. Since he ended up in this world, he had been constantly dozing off at his desk. As if from a past life, he brought the habit of resting at the table, and he himself could not understand whether it was good or bad. Outwardly he looked like a 30-year-old, but inside he carried the experience of a man already over 40. Sometimes he thought that finally he could relax. The next day a woman approached their house. Samia immediately felt her presence, as if someone quietly stood behind. She turned her gaze outside. Izo noticed this and asked what exactly caught her attention. Samia immediately realized someone had come. A loud knock banged on the door, and a voice solemnly declared, "Camillo sent me. I want to order a sword." A real shock pierced Izo. He instantly oriented himself, and Samia tightly gripped the knife at the ready in case something went wrong. Izo moved to open the door. As soon as the door opened, he greeted the visitor warmly. The woman asked if he was the blacksmith who supplies weapons to Camillo's shop. She introduced herself. "My name is Helen." Izzo noticed how her voice echoed loudly, and he confirmed his identity. In the city, he recognized her as his first client and invited her inside. They took their places. Iso wondered if she had come alone and confirmed, yes. Then he remembered the dangers lurking in the forest, and Iso had encountered no troubles. Helen said that finding this place was not easy, but she still followed the trail of smoke and eventually reached it. She felt it too, a strange, interesting atmosphere hung in Iso's workshop. Iso decided, wolves usually avoid those who have significant power. Iso understood this. She herself entered the forest, found the workshop, and successfully fulfilled the condition, so he accepted her request and began forging a sword for her. Then he sank into thoughts. What exactly did she need? Helen untied and extended her current sword, showing that she was a mercenary. Memory, she was looking for something similar in shape, but much more powerful. Due to the nature of her work, she rarely managed to properly maintain her weapon on the battlefield, yet survival or defeat depended on how skillfully she wielded it. Iso recognized this weapon, a pair of short swords. When he took them in his hands, he noticed many scratches and chipped edges, and his gaze fixed on their worn surface. What Iso created is not just things, but real weapons. If he forged them with his own strength, then no enemy, no matter how great, would have any chance, and thus people would inevitably suffer from his creations. This is a truth he could neither ignore nor avoid, so from now on he was forced to accept it. The effect overwhelmed him, even though he would never get used to it. Iso admitted, Helen's swords were masterfully made. He felt the skill of their creator in these blades, and decided to show them to Rick, his apprentice, so he did. Helen did not object, and Rick carefully examined the blades. She concluded that this was truly good weaponry. She understood, if Helen wanted something better, giving it to her master was the only way out. Option, Helen answered with noticeable confidence, seriously weighing Rick's words. Iso switched to finding out what exactly this weapon was intended for, and this momentarily unsettled Helen. He wanted to know exactly how the swords would be used, because that would mean his work was done even before the first hammer strike. Helen immediately felt how important this was. And they decided, instead of explanations, it was better to show. They rushed outside. Helen drew both swords and began to demonstrate her skill. Her movements were swift, measured, and extremely precise. Iso watched intently, noting the speed. He realized one blade keeps the enemy under control and pressure, while the other delivers the decisive strike, and even so, her pace was still stunning. Iso looked closer and suddenly noticed something strange. He immediately focused on her condition. Helen felt alone. It was much harder to hide this. She looked at Iso and hinted that with a partner it would work better, and this unexpectedly threw him and Samia off balance. Iso decided, if Helen wants sparring, Samia, as a beast person, will get used to fighting more than he will. But Helen felt Iso was stronger than Samkia. Samia reacted a little irritably to this impression. She admitted that there might be some truth in it, but she still didn't like it. Iso pondered, since he ended up in this world, he had never truly fought. Yet his body seemed to know how to move by itself, as if it was made for fighting from the very beginning. It was a feeling of instinctive knowledge. He already knew exactly what to do, as if the power living inside him was guiding his steps. Iso accepted everything as it was and moved forward. He decided that Helen just wanted to show her skill and did not intend to seriously injure him. Iso stepped forward and stood right in front of her while Samia and Riku quietly watched. He gathered his courage, hoping the conversation would not turn into full tension, but Helen did not hesitate. She moved first, quickly closing the distance in. In a flash like lightning, Iso managed to block the attack and immediately unleashed a flurry of quick strikes. He stood firm, parrying each of them. Then Helen retreated. Iso responded with a countermove. Helen blocked it. Her movements were so fast that Iso saw them as flashes. He lunged forward and held onto her pace with all his might, yet he still understood without his own ability, he would neither be able to move nor keep up with noticing attacks. He would simply be instantly overwhelmed. Just keeping up with her movements demanded all his attention. Helen lunged into the fight again from the side. Iso managed to dodge, but the strike passed so close it almost cut a part of his hair, and it immediately became clear. Helen no longer restrained herself. She was striking for real, so she went on the offensive again without any hesitation. A little later, they both stood still, catching their breath. Iso felt that he still managed to stay on his feet, and Helen openly acknowledged his strength. Iso felt a slight irritation. He realized that he had been defending and only dodging all the time. Helen smiled and admitted, already in the first few strikes, she decided to end the duel. Few can withstand her thunder sword, and she admitted that she got a little carried away before apologizing. Iso felt it in his body and head. Now he understood more clearly what exactly he needed. He estimated that he could manage to make the sword in 2 days, and expected that she would return in 3. Helen hesitated. The thought of leaving immediately stopped her. Iso carefully weighed her possible reaction. While Helen focused on taking up sparring again after a short break, Iso realized if everything went the same way, he would not be able to work on the sword. Helen grasped the essence and adjusted her approach. Instead, he promptly stated that he wanted to observe the forging process itself. Iso remembered that the work would last 2 days, so Helen suggested staying there for that time. Suddenly, Iso realized he had already arranged the guest room, the bed was in place, and looked at Rika and Samia before making a decision. Allowing her to stay, Helen noticeably rejoiced and lightly tapped Iso. That's right, Iso Smith. The forge accepted its first client. After talking with Helen, Iso refocused on the rest of the day's tasks, intending to finish what remained. Samia approached him and reported that she had cleaned the burrs. Iso nodded and instructed her to leave the parts where they were. Samia moved on to cleaning and focused intently on straightening her arrows. Iso shouted loudly at her. Noticing that she worked more skillfully, Iso thanked her, and Samia responded with a simple, satisfied gesture, her tail gently wagged. Every time she did not go hunting, Samia helped Iso in the workshop. Mostly her activities boiled down to casting and removing burrs, and it seemed that this was where she found true pleasure. Iso thought that sometimes it wouldn't hurt to let her take the hammer in her hands. Nearby, Helen silently watched them as they worked. After some time, Iso made it clear it was time to have dinner. Helen recalled that on the way she was surprised by an unusually large deer. Samia recognized it as a roe deer and realized such creatures can cause trouble if angered, so Helen remembered this. And she added she even noticed a bear from afar. Iso and Samia shuddered at that news. When the word bear was spoken, Samia involuntarily pressed her hand to her stomach again. Iso quietly thought, the bear is still somewhere nearby. Helen noticed that something had changed with them and wondered what it could mean. Iso told that once a bear attacked Samia and she almost died. Helen thought about it and believed. If her equipment had been in perfect condition, maybe she could have defeated such a creature. Iso warned, do not take unnecessary risks. He knew that this bear was dangerous even for Samia, who knows the forest well. He made it clear, if something unforeseen happens, it will be hard for them to withstand the consequences. Helen heard this and unmistakably caught his concern. After a while, Iso lightly tapped his face to gather himself and focus again. This was their first individual order, so he decided to put all he had into the work. Iso began with a magical spell. Helen plans to check the progress the next day, and for now went into the forest with Samia to explore the area and collect materials. When Iso remembered how skillfully Helen used to wield swords, he heated the iron and carefully forged it, keeping the blade evenly thin and squeezing out the maximum from all available materials. Thanks to the special vision he was gifted, he saw the structure of the iron deeper, almost as if he could distinguish its particles. He continued smoothing out the irregularities, shaping the blade, and with each strike the quality of the weapon steadily improved. Then Iso decided to test his own strength. He ordered Rick to bring a short sword of a common model, and she obeyed. He stuck the ordinary blade into the tree trunk to firmly secure it in place. Then he struck him with a freshly forged, custom-made sword. His hopes were fully justified. The blade turned out to be strong, and there were no visible damages on it. Riku almost froze at what he saw. Iso looked at the simple sword and suddenly realized such a thing can no longer be mass-produced. For sale, Riku hoped that after a little refinement or sharpening it could still be sold, but Iso decided otherwise, even though the quality was still at an acceptable level. Acceptable, he just wasn't going to sell what had just been used to test another weapon. Instead, he decided to remake it and keep it for home use. Riku saw in this a trait of his nature, a craftsman who stubbornly holds to his principles. Iso accepted this with barely noticeable satisfaction. Although he could be called stubborn, it did not mean he was unintelligent. Even if these abilities were given to him, he decided to put all his determination into his work because working this way, he felt he was finally approaching the work he had long dreamed of, and this thought gave him a quiet, warm satisfaction. For the final touch, Iso carved a mark at the end of the handle, and at that moment realized the first sword was already ready. Riku really wanted to examine it, and Iso allowed her to take it. Riku carefully studied the sword, the gaze sharp, unwavering. Aizo noticed how she was staring so intently at the blade as if no detail could escape her attention. Then he himself wondered, does the blade meet the expectations placed on it? Riku realized neither an ordinary nor even an average talent could handle this. She thought about Isaac and admitted, despite the reason for his departure, the North suffered a great loss. Meanwhile, Isaac also mulled over this thought, doubting whether his skills were truly at that level. Riku does not back down from his conviction, steadfastly holds on to it. Iso felt the power gather in his hands, not like usual, and it even seemed impossible. Using this ability consciously now, he finally understood something important. This time his work was focused on iron and strength, so the blade, by design, could not cut through, for example, a gigantic boulder. But if he only chased after sharpness, it could have become true, and an incredibly powerful weapon would have appeared in the world. He suddenly wanted to check what would happen if you took materials better than iron. Having found the golden mean between endurance and hardness, he could make a weapon that combined both qualities. Iso understood this immediately and without any doubt. In other words, if he acted recklessly, he would not only have knocked the user's course off, but also pushed them into much greater danger. And if the weapon he created turns into a strategic instrument of power, then he would have to stop and honestly ask himself, would he have enough strength to bear this responsibility? Riku called her master, apologizing and anxiously wondering if she had accidentally said something offensive. Iso reassured her, everything was fine, he was just thinking things over. Iso decided he must not allow himself to fall into dark thoughts about what had not even happened yet. But as soon as he realized this, everything became clear. He would have to keep these fears in mind when taking orders. And the most important thing was different. He had created something that Rick sincerely rejoiced in becoming his student, and that was more than enough. In a moment, Samia and Helen returned from their walk. They had gathered quite a lot: medicinal herbs that prevented suppuration, and various bitter and sweet plants. Samia noticed that the wolves were more restless than ever that day. All this seemed to be explained by the large black bear that Helen had seen. Iso froze for a moment, processing what had happened, and again looked up at his food. He looked steadily at Samia, and she immediately gave in to noticeable pleasure. Iso quietly thought about the bear nearby, and worried not only about Samia, he also kept Riku in mind and understood well. He had to be careful not to drag them into danger. The next day, Iso took up work again. He immersed himself in forging the second blade for a special order, while Helen carefully watched every move. Watching Iso, Helen noticed how he worked smoothly and quickly, movements confident, precise, without any unnecessary fuss. Riku was not surprised, he knew. For Iso, such speed of work posed no difficulties. While she wondered if she could ever match him, Helen suddenly realized, even devoting her whole life to the craft, she would hardly reach his level, and accepted it. However, she believed in Iso's skill without hesitation. Iso overheard their thoughts, and a warm, sincere feeling of gratitude spread within him. But at the same time, restless unease did not leave him. He knew that a significant part of his abilities was a gift, and such high praise each time became his own burden. Helen recognized the blade; it held lightning power. Iso acknowledged this and officially confirmed it. He solemnly confirmed, both swords are finally ready. He carefully places them on the table. Helen clearly rejoiced as soon as she saw this couple. She instantly felt the same lightning-like energy in them, and immediately was sparked by the desire to try. Then Iso stopped her, noticing it was already late, and explained she would be able to try them the next day. He realized he had stayed longer than planned, and because of that made her wait, so he asked her to eagerly wait until tomorrow. At first she stubbornly refused, but eventually gave in and agreed, refusing further tests. Finally, Iso began preparing dinner. Samia, Helen, and Riku did not hide their joy. Samia immediately recognized the dish: forest deer steak. This dish simply stunned them. Helen suddenly realized the raspberries they had picked earlier were already poured into the dish, and she had not expected that at all. Riku thought again. Even in the previous house, she had never tried anything like this. Iso explained that after completing his first individual order, this meal became a small celebration for him. Samia immediately understood this and sincerely thanked him, and Riku responded to her in the same way. Likewise Iso, he accepted their words and noticed that Riku had supported him the whole time while the work lasted. Helen reacted, as always, cheerfully and sincerely greeted. Iso understood that this moment came precisely because of her requests and sincerely thanked. The next day they went outside, and Helen was preparing to test the varieties. She felt how the weapon comfortably fit in her hands. Yesterday's anxiety did not let her go, not allowing her to truly rest. Iso watched as Helen plunged the blade into the dough, urging her to swing it. This, Helen instantly rushed forward, cutting through the air with precision and lightning speed. Samia and Riku froze in admiration. As soon as Helen tested the sword, she immediately realized its true quality was exceptional. She put down the weapon and rushed to her. Iso, suddenly frozen, they suddenly pulled her into an embrace. Helen sincerely said that she was incredibly glad she chose Iso for this task, not in vain. Iso felt relief. Helen was satisfied with the result. She squeezed his neck tighter, and Iso's body was immediately pierced by growing tension. Iso explained, he has already checked the strength of the weapon, so if anything happens he will fix everything himself. And she, if convenient, can visit Camillo's workshop or come directly to his home. After this, their conversation just as quickly again came back to the question of payment. Iso left the amount to her discretion, let her decide how much it is worth. Helen found it hard to determine its price, but Iso explained, accuracy is not the main thing here, it just has to work as agreed through Camillo. Then Helen stretched out everything she had at hand, 2 gold coins and several silver ones. Iso agreed without any hesitation, and that is exactly how the agreement was concluded. Helen paused at the thought, is this amount really acceptable? It turns out to be more than what she paid for her previous weapon. Iso sighed, trying to calm his heart. Her old swords were well made, so for him this exchange was fair. Helen showed a satisfied smile and barely nodded. Their faces froze in battle expressions, and then they firmly shook hands. She made the last farewell gesture and walked away. Iso pondered her strength and finally realized what she was capable of. Samia noticed how much effort it had previously cost her and Rick to divert Helen from Iso. Rick emphasized how loud Helen was, while Iso quietly smiled. But after that, Iso focused on their usual work, and Rika decided to see how many short and long swords they now had, and Samia helped her. Then, 2 days later, a sudden turn of events occurred. The moment came to face the dangers of nature. One day Samia rushed back at full speed, just at the moment when, as if fleeing from something, she ran to the house. Iso noticed that she returned earlier than expected and immediately felt something was wrong here. Fear was clearly visible on Samia's face. She encountered a huge black bear. Iso checked her apartment. They checked her condition. Samia assured that she was fine. She ran away without even having time to think, deciding that it was already a flight, but she knew for sure. The bear had a sharp nose, so it could quite possibly still find her. Iso sighed with relief. She was safe, and his thoughts immediately returned to what needed to be done now. Samia probably ran into that bear somewhere nearby, and while it still roamed freely, they could at any moment encounter it again, a very real threat that Samia or Rick might be attacked. This act weighed on him until he pushed the thought aside. Iso dared and was about to leave. Samia reacted instantly. As soon as he set off, someone immediately tried to stop him. Iso grabbed a spear, deciding that it would be enough, and was ready to deal with the bear if he encountered it. Before leaving, he ordered Samia to securely lock the doors both in the house and in the workshop. Samia asked to go with him, but Iso refused. He realized, as soon as everything suddenly becomes dangerous, he will not be able to guarantee her safety. This thought unsettled Samia, but Iso calmed her down. He trusted his own judgment. It was not about doubting her ability to shoot a bow, he simply decided to face it alone. That previous exchange with Helen flashed again in his mind. It was then that he became sure. During a fight, the body will act as it should. Even when he restrained a blow, the knowledge inside controlled the movements, as if the body already knew how to fight. Samia could not calm down. Her body barely trembled as she watched him prepare. Riku also felt the same anxiety, and sincerely hoped that he would return whole and unharmed. Iso nodded to both and held on to one thought: not to fall and not to abandon them. Having settled everything, Iso moved to meet the bear. There behind him, the house was firmly locked, and Riku quietly prayed to remain safe. Samia looked at her and followed, picking up that silent hope. Meanwhile, in the rain-soaked forest, Iso crept forward, alert, watchful. He held himself as if standing on alert, catching every change around and moving toward where the danger felt strongest. Usually he relied on Samia to watch for threats, but before something like a big black bear, his instincts, sharpened by this ability, reacted extremely sharply. The rain beat on his arm, dulling sensation and muffling sounds, so the bear heard worse than him. Harsh weather became his chance, and Iso's eyes sharply widened as soon as he noticed something ahead. He staggered, lowered his head, and quietly exhaled. A moment from a previous life flashed before his eyes when he gave his life to save a cat, and now he stood here preparing to kill the bear. Here it was, the body had changed, but in his soul he still remained the same as he was then. The difference was in one thing: now he had something to protect. There was a time when, enchanted by the mundanity of an overworked office worker, he saw nothing truly important in the world. Now he had a family, and there were people who valued what he created. His gaze sharpened as soon as he pulled himself together. He found the big black bear and positioned its body in the right pose. The bear froze before him, watching intently. Its presence was openly hostile, and Iso prepared for a clash, meeting it face to face. The bear moved first heavily, with a grave intent. Iso accepted that he had to act, and did not feel hatred toward the animal, but knew it had to be dealt with. The bear lunged forward and swung its massive claw. Seeing the attack, Iso dodged. He managed to feel both the swing and the furious speed of the strike. Even one slanting slash could be fatal. Waiting a moment, he shifted aside and thrust the spear into the bear's body. Iso tensed as soon as he realized. His strike did not have the effect he expected. The wound turned out to be too shallow. The bear roared in response, and while Iso was watching, it swung its paw again. This time the blow hit. He was pushed and flew into a neighboring tree. Falling was not an option, so he forced himself not to panic. He quickly got up, straightened his position, and firmly grabbed the spear. When the bear approached again, Iso seized the moment and stabbed the weapon into its neck. The bear yelped in pain, and Iso's face became even sharper, more intense. As soon as he finally guessed the chance to end the fight, he rushed at it swiftly and completely determined to survive and protect what had become most precious to him. With this will, he plunged the spear deep into the bear's chest, and it collapsed. Iso watched closely and immediately realized this was not so simple. It knew. It no longer moved or breathed. The fight was over for it. He pulled the spear out of the body. He moved carefully and heeded Samia's advice that a clean cut might look almost unnatural. When he looked at the bear, he immediately understood what she meant. Then he sat down and rested for a moment. It was his first battle, then life truly hung by a thread for the first time. When the danger receded, he felt his whole body trembling. Even when his skills really decided everything, the outcome still came down to a slim advantage. He examined himself, bruises and scratches everywhere, but fortunately, the bones remained intact. Iso got up again and ran through in his mind what to do next. He had taken a life with his own hands, and since it had happened, he would like to make use of it to eat the meat and return the remains to the earth. But he did not know if it was safe, so he finally decided to carry it back. After some time, he finally returned. The rain was still pouring. Iso grabbed the bear and threw it over his back. Even with increased strength, the weight was incredible, but he did not give up and stubbornly pulled on. He noticed that the rain had started to subside a little. Iso had to quickly return home before other dangers caught up with him on the road, for example, wolves, and he decided that he had already covered about half the way. He suddenly froze. Something sharply knocked him out of his thoughts, and a moment later drew his gaze. The next moment, someone grabbed his leg and pulled. But he disappeared. Instead, Samkia appeared, revealing her more instinctive side. Iso calmed her down. He was safe. The bear was already dealt with, so Mia looked closely at him to make sure. She looked at him once more and checked if he was really unharmed, and Iso admitted. He got a few bruises and contusions, but no bones were broken. They met eyes for just a moment before he found himself in someone's trouble again. Emotions spilled out, and tears flowed from her eyes. Iso froze from surprise, cried from relief, and clung tightly to him. He responded by gently stroking her head. Riku approached nearby and hesitated, unsure whether to interfere in their conversation. At that moment, Iso clearly made it known that she was. It was not so. Riku later explained that Iso stayed longer than expected, and Samia was sure, if everything had gone as it should, he would have already returned. So they went out and set off to search. Iso sensed danger. Leaving the house under such conditions was dangerous. He knew Riku. Once Samia made a decision, she could not be stopped. She added that they were tracking Iso's scent and the bear tracks, and as soon as the two began to approach, they prepared for the worst, staying alert to face whatever appeared. While waiting and hiding, Riku noticed. Iso and the bear appeared simultaneously, so at first it was hard to understand what exactly had happened. Iso understood their actions and sincerely thanked them. Riku, in turn, directed that gratitude to Samia. He spoke. Samia felt his gratitude tightly pressed. During this time, the sky cleared, and Iso suggested they return home. After Mia calmed down, and all three together dragged the bear. For now, they decided to leave it by the lake, and the next day return and take it. As soon as they got home, fatigue suddenly overwhelmed Iso, so Riku took on dinner, and Iso went to rest in his room. In the room, as soon as he took off his clothes, it became visible how bruises covered his body. Samia rushed to check, anxiously watching every detail, and Iso calmed her, assuring that he was fine. Samia could not calm down. Uncertainly but stubbornly, she continued to examine him. Iso explained that he just needed to wash fatigue weighed heavily on him, mercilessly. He asked Samia to notify him as soon as the bath was ready. While he waited, he leaned against her and soon he fell asleep. Samia froze for a moment in surprise. He dozed off, leaning on her. She looked at herself and gently stroked his head. And already the next morning Iso felt a strange softness spread around him. Waking up, he immediately sat up and with fear realized. Last night he had not washed, and also noticed that both the bed and clothes were completely different. At that moment, Samia entered the room. The two quietly looked at each other with signs without words, but everything became clear. Iso immediately realized he had simply fallen asleep. Samia nodded he was sleeping deeply. She said that Riku was worried. If he remained dirty any longer, he could get sick. So the two of them wiped him down and put him to bed. Riku entered the room and saw that Iso was already awake. Iso sincerely apologized to Samia and Riku just smiled and said that his clothes were already washed, so there was nothing to worry about. Rika had already started to tell about how Samia called him at night, but Samia immediately cut her off. She did not want them to talk about it. Rika saw nothing wrong with it. Samia gently led Riku out of the room and asked Iso to come as soon as breakfast was ready. Iso agreed and was already about to leave, so the day started again. Simple, usual, filled with everyday tasks. Teenagers, the quiet inheritance of life, which they themselves had built. Somewhere in the estate, a name was heard, Black Forest. Up, the young lady shuddered as soon as she realized. She was ordered to hide in that forest. Nishan, that's what she called the one who said it, did not remain silent. There really was a blacksmith living in the forest, and a letter had already been sent to a traveling merchant who knew where to find him. So all she had to do was deliver this letter to the merchant, and then everything would go according to plan. He was confident that the blacksmith would treat her well. The young lady nodded and prepared herself. Meanwhile, in the growing city district, Iso was at Camilo's shop. They discussed business, and Camilo agreed to temporarily take some goods from him even at Iso's home. The products had already gained a strong reputation. But Iso was troubled by another memory. He remembered a young guard who once helped him at the very beginning, and he heard that the guard had returned to the capital and had not been heard from since, so Iso wanted to find out what had happened to him. Camilo looked uneasy. He couldn't brush off this question and wondered why Iso was asking it at all. No, Iso just remembered the help he received and wanted to repay it someday. The guard recently disappeared, so Camilo suspected something was wrong here. Camilo acknowledged the concern and fell silent for a moment. His gaze sharpened, as if gathering his thoughts together. Then he said, in the capital, among the high-ranking nobles, people are increasingly talking about war. Maybe this is related to everything, and Iso just froze with an empty look. Exactly, and Camilo directly added, it's better not to know too much about such matters for Iso's own sake. Iso accepted the warning and thanked him. Later Iso, Samia, and Riku headed home, pulling a cart full of materials. And at that very moment, somewhere on the road, a young girl was fleeing from pursuers, glanced over her shoulder, and suddenly realized, if this continues, they will catch her before she reaches the city. Far away, Samia's ears twitched sharply. She already caught the hurried footsteps. Iso instantly looked back at her and tensely guessed. Could they be bandits? Samia couldn't vouch for what she heard, but judging by the fragments, people were already fighting. Iso made the decision without hesitation. He ordered Samia to go first and find out what was going on there. Bandits or wolves, it no longer mattered. Samia immediately obeyed and rushed to where the noise was heard. Iso shouted after her, "We will be after you soon. Retreat immediately if it becomes too dangerous." Iso pushed Rika forward, and she immediately moved without hesitation for a moment. A little later, they reached the place where a group of men was fighting with swords against a young girl and Samia. Iso swiftly drew a short sword and decided to leave the baggage behind. There was no time for doubts. He rushed straight into the fight and plunged into the very heart of the clash. He saw everything, and anger rose higher and higher from what exactly caught his eye. One of the attackers noticed he was approaching, and he instantly swung his blade, and Iso just as swiftly parried the blow with his sword. He sharply pushed the man back to clear space and immediately followed with a single move, cutting across the man's lower back. Then from behind, Iso was attacked by another assailant, a bald man. Careful, Samia caught it first and shouted a warning. Iso managed to hear her in time and tightened his grip even more. Held tightly in his palms, he jerked sharply, and then Iso turned and took a heavy blow forehead to forehead. The fight ended in a moment. The attacker's sword shattered from the blow, and Iso did not hesitate in response. He plunged his blade into the man's chest. Seeing this, another man decided to survive rather than fight and fled, but he did not manage to escape. Samia's arrow hit him in the neck mid-run. Samia fired in time, and the shot rang out cleanly. Even Iso froze for a moment, stunned by how quickly everything unfolded. He looked back to see if anyone was left behind. According to Samia, no one was left behind. The young lady they had saved sat quietly and silently stared at what those events had left behind. After that, Iso turned back to her again. He understood now it would be difficult to speak, but they urgently needed to find out who she was and why she had been attacked. Too many people had already died there, and the guards would definitely demand explanations later. He asked her to take this as a chance to repay the help they had given them. The more closely he looked at her, the stranger her face seemed familiar. There was something in her that instantly emerged in him as the image of an actress from the previous world. The girl, young, and she was the first to thank for the rescue. She was saved, then she introduced herself Diana Emile. Due to certain circumstances, she came from the capital to live with one specific person. Diana told what happened. On the way, those men attacked her. In saying this, she clenched her hands, only now realizing how it could have ended for her if Iso and the others had not arrived in time. Iso quietly pondered. She bore a surname that usually signified status noble from the capital, and his thoughts immediately returned to the conflict Camillo had mentioned earlier. Could she be connected to it? He looked at Samia. She only quietly nodded, and that was enough. Iso realized there was no lie in Diana's words. Iso accepted what had happened and took on the next problem. Bodies were already lying around them. It remained only to count the time. It was passing quickly. Soon the patrol of guards would inevitably pass by. The question was simple: hide or reveal everything. Everything. Diana decided to hide. Iso closely watched her reaction, doubted whether she was truly confident, but she stood motionless. Those men had already surrounded her, and if they disappeared here, it would take time before someone realized they had been defeated. Iso instantly grasped the true meaning of that answer, and he immediately understood. This gave her time to reach that specific person. Diana confirmed it without any hesitation. Iso realized there was no pure way back anymore. They were already drawn in. When everything was already decided, he gave the order, take the bodies to the forest. He asked Riku to pull the cart forward, and she immediately agreed. Then he called Samia to help with the rest, and she joined without hesitation. After that, they dragged the bodies one by one. In that grim work, a thought stirred in Iso. For the first time, he truly understood what purpose the things he himself had created could serve. He did not know who was to blame for all this, and could not say whether the young woman was guilty or the men who drove her, and at that moment, one thing became clear to him. He decided to protect his family. For the sake of the family, he felt neither regret nor hesitation for what was done. For a moment he froze silently and stared at the fallen men. Then Samia noticed him and approached. Trembling with excitement, she asked if he was wounded. Iso assured her that everything was fine and thanked her for the concern. And then, without any delay, he made the decision they would return home. Iso asked Diana to tell more about the person she was looking for, saying that if they understood the situation better, they could help her. Diana agreed and began to explain everything she knew. According to her brother, that man lived in a remote place. And Iso immediately caught an important detail: Diana really has a brother. Then Diana explained that the man had settled there quite recently, and Iso quietly accepted this without any objections. Then she added something even more important. They said that the man was a very skilled blacksmith. With him, her brother's sword and knife both made by him, and as soon as everything settled down, her brother was going to come again to fix them. And it was then that everything suddenly fell into place in Iso's mind. No wonder his face seemed familiar to him. Iso remembered the guard who once helped him Marius. Carefully, almost silently, he asked another question. Iso wanted to find out what her brother's name was Marius, and whether he worked as a guard in the town beyond this outskirts. Diana immediately looked clearly surprised. She confirmed her brother is Marius Albert Emile. The surprise only intensified when she looked at Iso and mentally could not shake off the question: how does he know his name? The answer put everything in its place. That is, the person her brother trusted, the blacksmith from the Black Forest, turned out to be Iso. He did not look away and openly admitted Yes, he really knew Marius. Then Izo began to explain who this person was. The one her brother was talking about was most likely him. This discovery clearly threw Diana off balance. Iso understood why it happened this way. It is not something anyone would believe immediately. Then all four of them moved forward again, shoulder to shoulder. At first, Diana kept the letter from her brother, addressed to Camel, with her. The plan was simple. She needed to find that one man who knew where Iso was and ask him to show how to reach him, and fate simply led her there. When Iso remembered this, it became clear. Marius was going to entrust his younger sister to this stubborn man who lived in a terrible black forest, a place most avoided. That alone was enough for Iso to understand. Diana was carrying much heavier worries than she had shown so far. Then Diana asked him, "What is your name?" Iso introduced himself and at the same time introduced everyone who was nearby: Samia, the beast person, and Riku, the gnome. I judge that they... While the trouble had not yet reached them, there was time. The guards would probably soon find everything, so the smartest thing was to return to his home. Diana agreed and relied on their protection. Later, they finally reached the place, and Iso decided, first to deal with the luggage, and only then to eat. Samia was so alert that on the way back they did not encounter a single pursuer. The guest room might have seemed modest and a bit cramped for a young lady, but Diana settled in it without any complaints. Later, the smell inside the what they served her clearly lifted her mood and melted the tension. Iso quietly pondered, maybe someone really managed to lift her up. Someone who grew up in a noble family would probably eat such simple dishes without any hesitation. Still, he hoped she would agree. As soon as Diana tried it, her eyes instantly widened with surprise. She really considered it tasty. Iso, Samia, and Riku fixed their gaze on her reaction. As soon as she realized she was being noticed, Diana was slightly embarrassed. Her appearance let everyone know that she hadn't eaten anything since morning. She was just very, very hungry. Rika was not worried at all. On the contrary, she was pleased that Diana was enjoying the food, and Diana made it clear no formal treatment was needed. Then Iso thought, valuing good food is more important than status. Even in the toughest times, if someone could somehow eat properly, they would still manage. Now Diana was thanking everyone for accepting her so suddenly. Without any warning, she just appeared. Iso quietly observed her condition. She was pursued, almost killed, and forced to rely on strangers in an unfamiliar place. But if she still felt taste and sincerely reacted to warmth and food, it meant she was holding up better than expected. After dinner, the atmosphere became even gloomier, and Iso turned the conversation to why she was expelled from the capital. He hesitated to ask for a long time, but now that she would stay by his side, it was better for everyone to know the truth. Diana agreed. Then, with quiet, unbreakable determination, she prepared to tell what was happening in her family in the Emile household. The Emile family, those who kept the accounts, ruled the region, which included the town of Camillo. There were 4 children in that family: the eldest son Leon, the second son Coral, the third son Marius, and the daughter Diana. Usually, the heir's path was clear. As the eldest son, Leon was to become the count, but a month ago everything suddenly went awry. In the remote region, a horde of monsters appeared, and the count set out to tame it. Leon, as the heir, went along to fulfill his duty. But after the battle, both the count and Leon died. Even worse, the private army that went with them was also destroyed. Outside, as soon as the news of their death spread through the capital, Mary immediately returned there. During the investigation, he came across several suspicious details that surrounded this incident like a shadow. At first, it was claimed that a powerful monster attacked them, but no obvious traces of this creature remained, and the wounds on the bodies were neither from horn strikes nor from fang bites. They were cuts. So a human hand could very well have been behind these deaths, and as soon as this assumption took root, suspicion instantly fell on the one who benefited the most from their demise. The second son was Carol. Iso quietly insisted, trying to get to the essence what exactly was hidden behind this. The answer was convoluted. Carol was an illegitimate son, so he knew well. Any legitimate heir from the lawful wife would stand above him in the line of inheritance after Leon's death. This role was to be taken by Marius. Iso, Samia, and Rick silently watched as the pieces of the puzzle came together. Carol's mother died shortly after childbirth, and out of pity, Diana's mother took him in, raised him as her own, and treated him the same as the others. Before that event, Diana had no idea about the deeply hidden family secrets. But reality suddenly changed. If the issue of inheritance was not resolved quickly, the family could lose its position and court rank. There was no time to delay because the ruling count was already gone. Diana quietly accepted this truth, and at that very moment, Iso was overwhelmed by a gloomy realization. The one who wanted to kill Diana turned out to be not a stranger at all, it was her own brother. Iso quietly thought that back then Marius seemed too clever for an ordinary city guard, and now everything made sense. He found out Marius was the Count's son, so it became clear. Having seen Marius's letter to Camillo, Iso finally decided that Diana would remain under their protection for now. Sudden kindness clearly confused her. He added that if anything was unclear, she could turn to Samia or Rick. Both responded sincerely and gladly ready to help with whatever they could. Diana accepted their care with sincere gratitude. Iso voiced another thought. When everyone addressed her formally all the time, it created unnecessary tension. If she spoke to them more simply, it would probably be easier for everyone to get along. The same proposal initially stunned Hirsch struggled to adapt on the fly, stumbling through the change until she finally got the hang of it. Iso approved it and immediately felt relieved, so everyone laughed together. Starting from the next day, their daily life changed a little. Today, everyone together took up the household chores. Diana showed what to do and warned that it is dangerous to enter certain trees. Soon Iso announced that he was being hired for work. Before leaving, he asked Samia to look after Diana and she agreed without hesitation. But what Iso expected and what actually happened turned out to be completely different. Diana, having offered to help, eventually joined him in the workshop. Then Samia began teaching Diana all the steps of weapon making, and Iso, who was watching from the side, noted with surprise. Samia remembered the methods he taught her remarkably well. Regarding Diana, despite her noble origin, it turned out she was stronger than everyone expected. Rick noted, the day before, Diana confidently wielded his sword, so there was no doubt she already believed in her own strength. Later, when the workday ended, Iso decided to stop there. There he noticed and appreciated how Diana tried on her first day. Diana looked at the ready swords and immediately noticed a clear difference in quality. Iso explained, the long sword is the standard model, and the short sword is the higher class model. Diana asked to see the sword. Iso allowed it but immediately warned, the hilt is not finished yet. She took the blade in her hands and stared at it for a long time, focused, attentive. That expression on Iso's face involuntarily brought back memories of Riku of their first meeting, and Diana was caught by the sword itself. Riku immediately agreed, recalling how impressed she was the first time by such a level of craftsmanship. Diana definitely felt it. Even in the capital of blacksmiths capable of making work of such quality, there are not so many. Iso quietly thought that he still knew little about the overall skill of blacksmiths in this world. But if he limits himself to selling only the higher class model, most likely, he will manage not to stand out, just present it as the work of a skilled master. Suddenly Diana looked at him and asked for a match. This request suddenly threw Iso off balance. A duel with him and with swords at that. Diana made it clear that she was truly determined. And at that very moment Iso suddenly realized Diana also craved a fight. She desperately wanted to see him fight again, especially after she saw how he fought when he saved her. Iso instantly understood what she meant, and recalling that scene, he also realized there was almost no time left until night. He agreed, deciding that they would have time for one duel before dark. Diana openly rejoiced at such an answer. Iso could not help but think that she was by no means like an ordinary noblewoman. Soon both prepared for sparring. She did not understand why she was so happy about this, especially since the blade she chose looked too serious for a casual duel. But as soon as both were ready, the duel erupted into a fight. Diana moved first. She pushed forward with her foot, gaining momentum, and with a lightning-fast lunge delivered a strike. Iso cleanly parried it and responded with a counterattack, but Diana managed to dodge. Time flowed differently. The blades clashed again and again, exchanging sharp, tireless blows until both retreated. Iso felt and noticed. Her movement was as fast as a blade and impeccably precise. She was not competing with Helen, but from her stance and sword work it was clear. Iso knew what she was doing. He gripped the hilt even tighter, and from the side Sumia also noticed that Iso began to take the duel more seriously. Then Diana tried to lure him into a tricky feint. Iso responded with a side strike so clean and fast that he stopped it just before it hit her. Her result was obvious. He considered it his victory. Diana was breathing heavily after exchanging blows and accepted the result. After the match, Iso admitted, moving so much really exhausted him. Diana immediately felt something else in the fight. He was not entirely serious. Iso had no reason to object. For him, it was just sparring. They were practicing strikes, and it never turned into a fight to the death. Yet Diana could not close her eyes to the result. She failed to land a single truly clean hit on him. He, Iso, still acknowledged her merits from his point of view. She really did well. This response only further confused Diana. To hear that the one called the Rose of the Arena was described merely as doing not badly, she definitely did not expect that. There, Iso just looked confused, not understanding which title had just been mentioned so indifferently. And then Sumiya made her comparison. Out of 100 fights against Iso, she had won only one. This impressed Iso much more than anyone else. Diana was equally shocked. As soon as the beast woman spoke, her words immediately became even more weighty. Sumiya simply confirmed what was said. Then Riku added one more detail. Iso was so strong that he took Helen's blows right to the forehead without any problems, as if it were nothing. This comment made Iso reconsider everything. He thought Helen had given him only a minimal level of strength for self-defense, but now he was no longer sure of that. As soon as Helen's name was mentioned, Diana reacted instantly. She knew exactly who it was. Helen was known as the Lightning Blade. Iso recognized this name. It seemed familiar to him, and a spark went off in his head, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Diana stubbornly tried to squeeze the truth out of him. Could it be that he withstood Helen's blows and did not fall? And Iso casually recalled, they fought for almost 15 minutes. This answer confused her again. For Diana, 15 minutes against Helen was not something ordinary. She explained that Helen earned the nickname Lightning Blade because of her stunning speed, and this fame spread far beyond the usual fighters. She was known even among the nobility. Iso quietly doubted whether Helen was really that all-powerful, and still could not believe he had escaped that fight alive. Diana was turning over her reputation in her mind, facing her head-on, and even retaliating with a blow meant something significant, but before she could finish her thought, Iso interrupted the conversation and suggested returning home. And then something unexpected happened. Diana suddenly dropped her sword, sank to her knees, and bowed deeply before him. This place is already strangely familiar to Iso. And here she is, trembling in voice, asking to be accepted as a student. Iso was completely taken by surprise. He glanced sideways and noticed that Samia and Riku looked too excited about this situation. In his mind, moment by moment, several facts came together. She was Marius's beloved younger sister, the Count's daughter, a young, unmarried noblewoman entrusted to him. In front of him, and now she was kneeling right before him, so Iso could only assume, in this world, bowing was probably a common practice. The world, after brief hesitation, he gave in on one condition. If she was ready to train once a day after work, he would allow it, and Diana's face instantly lit up. But Iso immediately explained. He would not give her true sword mastery, and did not know how to teach well himself, so the main part would have to be learned by observing him. Diana agreed without hesitation. Her mood immediately soared, and Riku and Samia sincerely rejoiced for her. Watching all this, Iso quietly guessed. Diana was probably a real tomboy at home. He added one more rule, not to call him master and not to behave too formally around him. Diana agreed. And almost imperceptibly Iso took in a second student, even though she was not a blacksmith's apprentice, and his daily troubles quietly increased again. And from the very next day and onward. During the day, Diana helped in the workshop, and in the evening the two of them exchanged blows, swinging wooden training swords. It was clear Diana had undergone truly painful training. Her movements were agile, sharp, and lightning fast. As for Isa, the only thing he could realistically offer, relying on a self-taught style that gave him a cheat, was repeated sparring. And even that was enough to become a springboard for her growth. Everything was almost like Rick's blacksmith lessons. Iso became a living measure for them. Even if he couldn't properly teach them, both could rely on the principles they already had, and Iso was sure. Eventually, this would become valuable experience for both of them. In Emil's house, Marius sat alone. He rested and sighed heavily. Only one name remained in his mind: Coral. Marius sincerely believed, after the funeral of his father and older brother, Carol would simply become the new head of the family. And here the truth turned out to be quite different. He remembered the moment when Carol trembled with rage, shaky, like a disturbed whirlwind. Marius saw him like this for the first time. It happened very soon after the inheritance quarrels flared up again, and Carol ran out of the house in fury. After that, strange events began to arise around Marius one by one, as if from nowhere. Suspicious documents surfaced. They were fabricated and planted in turn to ruin his reputation. And then assassination attempts immediately followed openly, right in broad daylight. If it were only about him, Marius would be sure he would manage to defend himself or prove the truth. But Diana was already drawn into this game, and everything turned upside down. and above all still hangs the event that happened a few days ago. A letter to put an end to the conflict, Marius realized. He needed help from outside, and there was one person he could count on, but whether that man would agree he did not know. With this thought, he sat down to write. Later, deep in the forest, Iso was searching for something. He carefully searched the area and fixed his gaze on one point. No one was visible nearby, and he decided that the time had come. It had. Standing there, Iso pondered. Only a few days had passed since Diana arrived. He went to the city to sell his goods, gave Camillo Marius's letter, and explained the matter. After that, they decided together what to do next. Camillo had long known about the trouble she hoped Iso would not get involved, but Iso saw it differently. Diana was already entrusted to him, and since then it was impossible to hold him back, so Camillo had to come to terms with this truth. Iso suddenly remembered something important. He owed Marius. If Marius needed a blacksmith, Iso was going to do everything he could to help. Camillo finally understood everything. Because of this, they agreed on a secret place along the highway just by the forest, where they could secretly exchange letters. After a few days, Iso finally got in touch with him. Iso froze at that very moment, just after reading the contents of the letter. The message was direct. By tomorrow, he had to prepare everything needed for blacksmithing and be ready to depart, for the capital Somion would be sent for him soon, so there was no room for hesitation. Iso quickly told Samia, Rick, and Diana that she is heading to the capital, and the three of them will stay home. The thing that worried Riku the most was her blacksmith work. Iso ordered her, as always, to keep practicing. He checked once more if she felt confident enough to take on the forge by herself. The bellows and materials in the warehouse were already at hand, so no problems were expected. Iso then reminded that there was still food in reserve. He would definitely hold out for some time. And Samia added, if the supplies do run out, she would simply go hunting and bring more. At that moment, Iso quietly realized, beside him was a real, reliable family, and he calmly gave them his home. Diana felt guilty. She thought Iso would get into danger because of the quarrel in her house. Iso waved his hand. Marius was to blame, and that was his own punishment. This answer made Diana smile. When the mood settled, Iso decided not to dwell further. For now, they would focus on today's work, and all three women agreed. The next day on the highway, Iso noticed a carriage approaching. Camilla was riding in it. As soon as he drove up, he shouted sharply to Iso, quick, get back in. Camilla apologized and explained that Iso would have to hide in the box. Some people must not see him. Iso nodded, but the box looked too cramped to hold a person. But when he opened it, he was overwhelmed with surprise. The bottom stretched much deeper than it seemed at first glance. It was cleverly hidden along with a concealed compartment so that the storage appeared smaller than it actually was. A simple trick, but in such times, tricks were valued even more than appearance. Iso was genuinely surprised when he came across the secret compartment. Camillo waved it off, saying, it's just the wisdom of a little stone. The hour dragged on. Having spent some time in the box, Iso began to recognize voices and feel movements outside. Judging by how long the trip lasted before he fell asleep, they had already traveled quite a distance, and the noise around grew louder. Then a decisive command sounded as if paving the way for someone, and, in a moment, called the next person forward. Iso immediately understood. This was some kind of checkpoint at the entrance to the capital. A guard outside questioned Camillo and identified him as a peddler, and Camillo calmly confirmed everything and explained that he had brought several goods with him. Then the guard began to inspect. In the cramped box, Iso had to sit silently and wait. The tension slowly grew because he caught every rustle, and the guard checked the labels and decided they were carrying fabrics and spices. After that, they were allowed to proceed. Camillo thanked them, and the carriage moved forward. Only then was Iso finally able to relax. It was clear they had already driven quite far from the checkpoint when the carriage stopped again. Camillo gave a signal. It was now Safine ordered Iso to get out. As soon as he was outside, Iso stretched his numb body and admitted that the road had been too harsh. Camillo nodded and apologized for the inconvenience. Iso looked around in all directions. At first glance, this place looked like a forge. Somewhere nearby, a voice confirmed, yes, this is the private forge of the Emile family. Iso turned around and saw Marius standing right there. For a moment he was struck by the view. To see Marius in such a place, and the noble side appeared even more clearly. Marius explained that here they make and repair weapons for their soldiers. And then he finally greeted Iso after such a long absence. Iso responded to the greeting, and when he looked closely, he recognized the short sword that Marius carried. There was little time for a meeting. Marius apologized for the sudden summons and immediately got to the point. He made a demand. Iso must forge him a sword and make it the best blade that can possibly exist. Iso did not object but demanded to know the reason. Without it, nothing would move forward. Then Marius told about the trouble. The Emil family had a family sword, and a few days ago it was stolen. Marius asked if Iso understood what was happening in the Emil household. Iso nodded. He had long heard about it from Diana, Marius's younger sister. Then Marius stated that judging by the circumstances of the theft, it was most likely an inside job, and he was firmly convinced. The family sword was stolen by none other than his brother Coral. Iso immediately asked how this related to forging the sword. Marius laid out the plan as he saw it. Coral probably wanted to prove that the one who so carelessly lost the family relic was not worthy to inherit the house. At first he will pretend to help search for the lost blade, but as soon as the right moment appears, he will stage its discovery himself and use it to appear the most worthy. The plan for Iso was far too transparental, most offensive, but this was exactly where he came into play. Marius explained, there is no time to get the real sword in Corella. Since everything had gone so far, they would have to resort to another strategy. They planned to pass off the stolen family heirloom as a fake-in. This thought suddenly threw Iso off track. Sword? Marius said it directly. He wanted Iso to forge a new family sword for the Emil house, and only then would the true meaning finally fall into place. The sword forged by Iso would become the new treasure of the Emil lineage, passed down from generation to generation. Iso quietly pondered, does Marius even understand what he is asking for? Marius cleared his thoughts and said clearly, although the sword is called a family heirloom, it is not a divine artifact nor an elven work, it is simply steel. Long ago, the king gave it to the Amal family when their lands were recognized as a county, and it is said that it was forged by one of the most outstanding blacksmiths of that time. Iso fell silent, weighing the request. At that very moment Camillo interrupted the conversation and sharply said he had already seen the sword that Iso had forged for Helen. In his eyes, only a few human masters were capable of such a level. So if Iso really managed to forge a blade of such quality, he would have nothing to fear. But Iso had one serious flaw. He had never seen a real family sword, so if he made a substitute by guesswork, the new blade would definitely look different, and this very difference could expose the entire plan. Marius explained that the ancestral sword is brought out only for private ceremonies, and on other days it is almost never shown. In the family records, only its history was kept without detailed descriptions of its shape or construction, so he believed that differences in appearance were unlikely to be a serious problem. Iso paused for a moment, carefully weighing every detail. Then he agreed to the request. Marius was glowing with admiration and immediately thanked him. But Iso stopped him right on the spot. He told Marius that there was no need to be so formal. He wanted him to speak as easily as during their first meeting in the city. Now his words stuck together, sounding constrained and uncertain. Marius, even holding himself with dignity, could not simply agree. It was unthinkable for him to humiliate the man who was about to save his family. Iso answered just as directly. Thanks to Marius, from the very beginning he could conduct business in the city without any problems. It was just a gesture in response. Mario fell silent for a moment, sinking into thoughts. If another option is offered, then the fulfillment of this task of the Iso debt will be considered settled. From then on they will be counted as equals, and there will be no need for excessive politeness between them. To him, Iso smiled and immediately agreed. Marius rejoiced and decided to put an end to it there. Iso quietly pondered. Was it appropriate for the blacksmith to speak so freely with the man standing next in line to become a count? At least, it was much better than those stiff, colorless conversations between them. Then Marius once again took up the real problem. If they fell under suspicion and exposure became inevitable, there was only one simple way out: to compare swords face to face. If the forged blade lost to the real one, so if only one, everyone would instantly understand which sword the king had really given. Iso quietly smiled to himself. This was exactly the kind of thought expected from someone raised as the heir of a noble family. Marius reminded him that time was short and asked to start at least once. Iso agreed immediately without hesitation. Iso focused, looked inward, and gathered all his strength. In his thoughts, the preparation was no trifle. He was about to do Marius a favor that could last a lifetime. The Emil family forge was not adapted for magic, so he had to light the furnace himself. But the matter was not only in the magic embedded in it. Iso also knew the basics of real blacksmith work. He knew what to do. First, he struck the iron on the anvil. Metal, after repeated blows, it slowly heated up to red hot. Then he placed it together with barley in the bark and set it on fire. Next, charcoal was poured onto the embers. Even the bellows here were manual, so he pumped them himself to make the flame come alive again. As soon as the heat subsided, ISO decided that this could be managed. He always relied on his magical bellows and magical fiery bed, so now he finally understood how these tools allowed him to fully devote himself to the craft. Yet he quickly settled in. From the prepared materials, he chose the neatest iron plate and decisively set to real work. His eyes sharpened, and immediately the knocking began. As the rhythm continued to sound, Iso felt something was a bit off with himself. What he held in his hands felt different than usual. Perhaps it was the other hammer. For a moment he hesitated, asking himself if he should have taken his own. But he pushed that thought aside. This was a special order blade meant to bear a weight incomparably greater than steel alone. He had to concentrate harder than ever, so he sharpened his focus. Next, when the shape of the long sword was ready, he took up the hardening and strengthening of the steel. Skill, next grinding, then sharpening, and now the sword was ready. Iso looked down at the finished blade, and instead of satisfaction, something inside him snapped. He felt only dissatisfaction. There was something wrong with it, and it sharply differed from his usual work. While everything was going on, Samia quietly attended to her own matters in the workshop and waited for Iso to return. When the silence dragged on, a memory suddenly surfaced in her mind. She recalled how Iso said he would return soon and how he relied on everyone. She also remembered how she called him to come back home alive and whole. That tiny memory lingered in her mind longer than she expected. It was clear. Samia was clearly worried about Iso. Iso stood nearby, but Reich cut in firmly. There was no need to worry. Iso would be fine. As soon as the voice sounded, Samia was struck as if by an electric shock, and she was instantly frightened. She immediately waved it off, assured in a firm tone that she was absolutely not worried, and began to explain. But Diana gently intervened. It was completely natural for Samia to worry. She also apologized for dragging them into her family's problems, because the guilt in her heart was impossible to hide. Samia sharply interrupted and denied right away. She was not worried about Diana or anyone else at all. Still, she admitted, Diana's family was clearly going through hard times. Samia added that although she was not very knowledgeable about human affairs, one thing she knew for sure: these people were incredibly important to Diana. As soon as these words sounded in the room, tears flashed in Diana's eyes. Samia and Reich, noticing this, without hesitation approached closer and quietly, each in her own way, tried to comfort her. This warm moment pierced the restless times. For now, Iso sat in the forge and was deeply lost in thought. He could not understand why his work suddenly felt different than usual, as if someone was pressing on him from outside, although he was doing the same as always and not slacking off, so all this strangeness did not fit in his head. Soon Camillo came with food for Iso and asked if he had already eaten everything. Iso was intently staring at the sword he had forged himself. Camillo suddenly fell silent and pondered, could something have gone wrong? Because from the outside the blade looked absolutely intact to him. Iso decided to check everything. He took the sword and cut several vegetables. And for Camillo, the result looked simply incredibly clear. But Iso remained dissatisfied. For him, this was by no means a premium level. Then he took out a knife for comparison and was about to cut another portion of vegetables. The blade glided smoothly and cleanly, almost without any resistance. That's all. Camilla froze in surprise. Then Iso concluded, as expected, something was different. Camillo noted with surprise. The knife did not even squeak when he cut, and Iso only smiled and explained that this is the true sharpness of the products he usually makes. Hearing this, Camillo finally realized what Iso had hinted at earlier. What lay before him was clearly not the work of an amateur. Iso understood this is how it should happen, so he decided to try once more. Then Camillo asked directly, what is he going to do with this blade? Iso said indifferently that if Camillo wants, let him take it, and Camillo instantly lit up with joy, but it quickly faded as soon as Iso added that he would give it away for pennies. Only then did Camillo have to admit Iso was truly a tough master of blades. Iso immediately threw himself into work without pauses and very soon assembled 2 new prototypes. Both turned out to be first-class products. Between them, a clear difference emerged. He scrutinized each one intently, as if a verdict that could still be corrected. The first blade shone brighter than the second. He made this impression without unnecessary reflection. Iso's gaze immediately caught one single detail, and he was already looking for a way to ignite the same spark in his own works. But then he suddenly realized this was not the answer. Without hesitation, he threw the blade back into the fire, then drew it out again. He chopped the metal blade into small pieces like bullets, wrapped them in thin cloth, and sprinkled straw ash on top. Then he heated everything in the flame until these parts merged into one solid piece of metal. If there were not enough materials for 2 blades, the answer was simple. He just had to add more. And when he had to add, he chose raw metal as even and pure as possible. After that, the assembly began. He heated the steel until it fused into one whole, flattened the lump, repeated the same folding motion again and again and again. And once you repeat it 15 times, then, finally, results begin to appear. He wove magic, sharpened sensations, and calmed nerves so, while pulling the material, the surface remained smooth and clean. While working, Aizan suddenly realized something important. That strange discomfort during strikes on the metal disappeared. His rhythm returned, and very soon the product was already ready. One thing remained. For it to become a true family treasure, Aizo had to decorate it properly. According to Marius, this sword was an incredibly valuable treasure, a family relic from the founder of the Emil line and part of their history. Not that ISO sought to encourage the making of fake family relics. Moreover, he knew there was no room for error here. He wanted to forge something so strong that it could stand alongside the original, and then everything depended on who would own it. It would be a sword passed down from generation to generation, so at least it had to be worthy to stand next to such a name. Iso carefully watched to ensure the blade had no warping, so that the honor of the family sword would never fall into disgrace. Finally, Iso noticed. It was already dark. The forging had absorbed him so much that time slipped away unnoticed. At last, the blade was ready, and all the decorations had also finished their work. Iso even hid the logo of a sitting cat on the weapon, a small secret sign, a quiet Easter egg. After such a long working day, he finally decided, enough. Without proper rest, continuing made no sense. The sword was already ready, and tomorrow there would be time to make the scabbard. The next day, Mario held the finished sword in his hands. And he froze, looking at her for him. It was truly a beautiful weapon. Iso, barely smiling, admitted. Making the scabbard took quite a lot of time, but he still managed to finish it on time. Without wasting a second, Mariah stepped into a sword stance and began swirling the blade. Iso watched with quiet pride, and Camillo stood stunned after all. It was the first time he saw the sword truly put into action. Iso did not take his eyes off. The movement strangely resembled Diana's style, and he noticed it immediately. Then he asked Marius how the sword felt. Marius said it was incredible. For him, it was the best sword he had ever held. Iso answered without hesitation. This is the best sword he can offer, so of course, it is excellent. Then Marius said that this weapon would make a perfect counterfeit of the family relic. After that, Marius firmly shook Iso's hand and sincerely thanked him, then asked Iso to rest that day, and promised to come the next morning to pick him up. Iso quietly thought, could it be that he will finally be taken home tomorrow? But the next day, everything went completely differently. The Amal brothers sat opposite each other at the family table. Iso stood next to Marius, and suddenly it became clear to him, Marius had no intention of taking him home. That morning, he woke up too early prepared, as if he had long planned to set out. But as soon as he came to, Marius appeared out of nowhere with several young ladies. Their hands instantly undressed Iso, then dressed him according to the occasion, and before he could understand what was happening, he was already brought here in that outfit. A respected man announced that he was asked to act as a judge in this case. Sitting in the judge's seat, he declared, Carol found the stolen family sword. A stern old man, Duke Menzel. He was considered a close friend of the former head of the Emil family, and his very presence pressed the air in the room. Carol stepped forward and proudly stated, the day before, he managed to find the sword near the border. Iso immediately recognized him, choral brother of Marius and Diana, the same man who dreamed of becoming the next head of the family. Then Duke Menzel said, if this matter were truly resolved, it would be possible to agree that Marius would lead the Emil family. But Carol immediately objected sharply. He insisted that the family relic was stolen, while his brother Marius did nothing, and precisely because of that failure, he insisted Marius is not worthy to lead the family. Iso felt the room tighten with tension. The confrontation was really beginning. Duke Menzel admitted. There was a valid argument in Coral's words, and then Marius asked for permission to speak on the matter. Duke Menzel allowed him to continue, and Marius calmly explained. He was not guilty of anything. The stolen family relic turned out to be a fake. Coral clearly shuddered at that statement. Then Marius drew another sword and declared that it was the true treasure. Carol immediately lost his composure and insisted that it was impossible, and Duke Menzel sharply ordered him to calm down. After that, the Duke asked Marius how anyone could believe that this sword was genuine. In response, Marius pulled out a letter. Pulling out the letter and handing it over, he explained that it was left by their father. According to Marius, the family always held ceremonies and public appearances with the fake sword, while the true family relic was kept elsewhere and kept secret. Carol froze at the truth, and Marius handed the letter to Duke Mansell and simply revealed its essence. When the country is engulfed in crisis, the rightful heir must take the family relic and stand against this trouble. Reviewing the letter, Duke Menzel instantly recognized it was the handwriting of the former Count Emile. Carol, moreover, looked all too disappointed. Izo quietly watched the scene and realized everything was done properly. Then he fixed his gaze on Camillo, who in response only winked. Iso absolutely did not want Camillo to wink at him, but he instantly realized Camillo's work was involved above all. Marius later said their older brother ran away from the family even before the truth became known. He said that he had come across him again only that recent day. After that, Marius apologized to Carol, admitting that he was late and did not manage to explain everything. Then Duke Menzel asked Carol if he still had any objections. If they were not there, he would have said it directly to the king himself. Carol stood, trembling with rage, and stubbornly repeated that he could not believe the sword he had found could not be a fake. Iso instantly realized what was behind this reaction. Carol wanted a comparisonto test, the blade Iso made against the original. As soon as Iso realized this, Marius accepted the challenge and resolutely declared that he would prove it to Carol. Then Marius turned to Duke Manchella and asked to use his garden for a few minutes. The Duke calmly agreed. Later, outside, in the garden of the estate, the man clenched his teeth and prepared to test his strength with the spear against opposite two swords, while everyone watched intently. Only he struck the sword with a spear, forged by Izo, and that very spear shattered into pieces, and Duke Menzel immediately recognized. Before him was the sword that the king once gifted to the Amal family. It had not a single scratch. Before them stood a weapon that contained both beauty and power, and Morel claimed that such a result was laughable. But Duke Menzel did not flinch, and did not waver for a moment. He calmly announced it was time to test Carol's sword. But before this happened, Marius stepped forward and said it was not necessary. He raised the sword and sharply brought it down, with a clear strike on Carol's blade, and Carol's sword shattered into pieces. Marius confidently declared that in terms of strength, durability, and sharpness, only one could be vouched for. His sword was genuine. Duke Menzel immediately responded that there were no more doubts and recognized it as the very sword that should rule the battlefield. When Carol heard this, he became even angrier. The Duke proclaimed that there would be no more problems in this matter. The Amal family's inheritance would be distributed according to the rules, and he himself would report the outcome to His Majesty. At these words, Marius barely allowed himself a tiny victorious smile. Then Duke Menzel asked, "Are both parties satisfied?" But Carol suddenly fell silent. For a moment, the entire garden froze. And in just a few seconds, he roared wildly and rushed straight at Marius with a dagger in his hand. Marius was already ready. With a single lightning-fast movement, he struck Carol with a sword. Carol whimpered piercingly in pain, but Marius did not even blink. Soon Marius knelt before Duke Menzel and sincerely apologized for dirtying his garden. He was ready to accept any punishment, but Duke Menzel said there was no need for that. Instead, he passed a sentence. Marius would be punished by avenging that thief with his own beautiful swords. After that, Duke Menzel addressed him as Lord Marius. Iso heard the word Lord and quietly thought, could it be that Marius was already recognized as the new count? Then Duke Menzel declared that that was all, and it was time for them to return inside. Marius cast a brief glance at his brother Coral, and for a moment tears sparkled in his eyes. And he immediately looked away and headed back to the estate. Meanwhile, Maria successfully took the place of the new head of the Emile family. Lord Menzel carefully arranged everything so that the incident caused by Carol would never come to light. After that, Marius and Lord Menzel plunged into a conversation about the future path of the family and what awaited them. No one was told about Carol's death instead. Rumors were spread that he had set off on a journey around the world and was secretly helping Marius from afar, and everything was done so that no one suspected his disappearance. Meanwhile, his body was silently taken out and secretly buried. When all those matters finally settled down, Iso suddenly began thinking about Diana. In Emile's mansion, two maids behind him quietly giggled. Iso noticed this and, unable to hold back, asked what exactly made them laugh so much. One of the maids noticed, It seemed Iso really loved the clothes he used to wear. Iso waved it off, saying he was just an ordinary old man from a small town and besides, from the heart. The clothes he wore now fit him much better and made him look much cooler. The friends nodded happily and immediately agreed. Then Camillo entered the room and sincerely praised Iso for the good work he had done there. Iso replied that after everything he had seen, he now definitely knew noble life was not for him. And saying this, he casually showed his outfit Marius, and Camillo both agreed with smiles. Marius sincerely wanted to thank both Camillo and Iso for helping him get through all of this. Camillo waved it off, saying it was a trifle, and declared that he had done nothing special. Marius confessed he could not offer them a great reward they already knew about his current situation, but if there was anything he could truly repay them with, he would very much like to know about it. Camillo was the first to respond. While Marius was dealing with him, there were no complaints. The business with the nobleman covered a lot. Then Marius turned to Iso and asked what he wanted. Iso said he wanted to learn about rare ore. Marius asked again if it was about something rare like mithril, and Iso confirmed. Marius promised when Iso needed such materials, he just had to pass the word through Camillo, and Marius would do everything he could. Then Mario handed Camillo some object and insisted that he accept it without any objections. Iso did not want to take anything at all, but Mario's eyes were strangely convincing, so in the end, he gave in and agreed. This, Marius bit him again with his fangs. They left the Emile family estate with a plan to return Diana and celebrate Maria's accession as the new count, while Iso finally headed back to the Black Forest. The forest, after saying goodbye to Camillo, Iso was left alone and entered the night forest lonely, heading home. Even before his arrival, Samia felt Iso was returning. Nezo saw this, and he was far from home only for a very short time, but he missed it more than he himself expected. As soon as he approached, Samia, Reik, and Diana came out to meet him to greet him. Samia shouted with joy that he had finally returned. Reik also greeted him, and Diana came closer and warmly said she was glad to see him home. Later, Iso will tell Diana what happened to Carol. And at that very moment, sadness overwhelmed her. Memories like a wave began to roll in again. Diana remembered, once Carol was kind to everyone when she was very little. He played with her, treated her father, Leon, and of course, Marius kindly. She was trembling with sobs. She could not believe that everything had come to this. The ancestral sword of the Amal family, the very one forged by Iso, turned out to be the weapon that took Carol's life. After a long cry, Diana, choking with emotion, apologized for shedding so many tears. Iso gently told her, "Don't worry." He believed that no one could hold back tears upon learning of a brother's death, especially one they once got along with. And no matter what a person did during their life, with the arrival of death all that falls away. And Iso reminded Diana that her brother's death was being concealed, so she needed to cry now while she still could before returning to the estate. He asked her to give in fully to grief. Diana quietly nodded to him in gratitude. After that, Iso promised. The next morning he would take Diana to the estate, as he himself was going to a banquet. Rake quickly understood. Iso would not be back for 2 or 3 days again. Rake admitted that Rake was right and apologized to her for leaving again. Rake pretended to be indifferent, but quickly made it clear this was definitely important to Samia, and Samia instantly flared up in anger at Rake for such bluntness. But finally Diana laughed at their brief quarrel, and Iso quietly rejoiced upon hearing and seeing her laughter. The next day they reached the estate. Iso said to Lady Diana they had already arrived. Diana reacted as if he spoke too formally, but her gaze immediately jumped. She saw her brother Marius, who was waiting for her. And then suddenly she rushed straight to him and immediately hugged him. Iso looked around and noticed. This time he was able to clearly see the outside world. A multitude of different races had gathered here. Humans of all skin tones, dwarves, beast folk, and even lizard folk. Iso had never seen a lizard folk before. Camillo then noticed, somewhere nearby a little one was snooping around, and explained massive gates at the city entrance, a sign of peace with the giant tribe, built long ago by the old king. Iso received these words with cool curiosity. Then Iso wondered, are there elves here? Camillo explained that elves usually live by themselves, so they rarely leave their forests. Usually they appeared only from time to time for supplies, so seeing them nearby was a real rarity. Soon Marius approached and apologized for making them wait. Everything spun wildly. Soon Marius was to have an audience with the king, so he had to prepare a report on the succession, and Iso noticed that he was extremely tired. Later in the mansion, Iso finally relaxed and decided nothing to do until tomorrow, when suddenly someone knocked on the door. At the threshold stood a servant and said, Lady Diana called for him and was waiting in the garden as soon as Iso entered there. In the garden, Diana was already waiting sword in hand, gaze focused and firm. Iso thought, do we really have to continue this even here? But Diana had already decided everything. She was sure this could be their last training, so not a minute could be wasted. The sparring flared up immediately. Diana was the first to rush forward and without any hesitation struck a blow, and Iso, as always, reacted instantly, took a defensive stance and parried the attack. The clashes repeated again and again, until time stretched under the clang of iron until Diana and Iso stopped, breathing heavily from exhaustion. Diana sharply ordered Iso to fight with her for real. She had already noticed that he only parried each of her strikes and never pressed, and Iso still barely believed what he heard. He did not know if she was really serious. Diana responded to him only with a determined look. Seeing this, Iso nodded. There would be one last round and they prepared again. But in one moment Iso abruptly thrust his training sword right to the side of Diana's face. What stunned her was not the force but the speed. She did not notice this movement at all. Iso told Diana that in the last few days her skills had grown incredibly, and if she continued to train diligently, she could aim as high as she wished. Diana was delighted by these words. She smiled and thanked him. Iso quietly thought that this would probably be the last time he would ever see her smile. Later, Marius, accompanied by Diana, went to report before His Majesty himself. Finally, he was to officially become the Count of Emil. The Beast, shortly after that, a hastily prepared banquet took place in full splendor. During the celebration, Marius raised a toast to the future prosperity of the Emil family and to the unchanging bond that connects them with everyone present. The hall erupted with loud applause and shouts of joy. While everyone was rejoicing, Iso stood aside and quietly thought that he could prepare some of those dishes and how much he wished Samia and Wright could taste them. He was lost in his own thoughts for a moment until Diana came up and remarked how well this outfit suited him. Iso replied that his shoulders were painfully tight in it. Then Iso told Diana that she was truly beautiful in her red dress and that calling her the Rose of the family was absolutely appropriate. Diana instantly blushed and reacted as if he had gone too far with the compliments. Iso made it clear. He said it sincerely, without any pretense. He was truly saddened by the thought that he would see Diana for the last time, while she just giggled and acted as if she didn't believe it. While they stood together in that warm moment, suddenly two men approached them and called Diana. They just asked her to join them, just like that, without any unnecessary explanations. Because of this, Iso was pushed aside. After that, he no longer had the chance to exchange even a word with Diana. Before he could realize it, the banquet was already over. Outside, when everyone was getting ready to leave, Iso said to Marius, "Become a good lord." He quietly looked around. Was Diana standing nearby somewhere, but he was already expecting it. After all, she was the Count's daughter, so she would be busy. Marius then drew a fake sword. He said that he had already been loaded into the wagon, and Iso is going to repair it. But Iso wanted to find out what Mari is going to do with this thing. He awkwardly asked if it would need to be returned after the repair, but Marius only answered no, and Iso can rely on him. Marius explained, under the current circumstances, they could not count on chance or anyone's purely personal decision. Iso understands and agrees. He will take good care of it. And then Marius added that there is one more thing he wants Iso to look after. It was lying inside the same box, and he gave it to Iso. After that they set off. Soon, just after some time on the road passed. Finally, they reached the entrance to the forest. Iso reminded him to take his luggage out from behind that box. Iso approached, opened the box, and finally looked inside. As soon as the lid was lifted, he froze from surprise and pure shock. Inside, someone was there, and he could not gather himself to believe. It turned out to be Diana herself. Long hidden in the box, she at the right moment looked up at him and cheerfully showed, "I'm here." As soon as Diana appeared in the workshop, the usual days in Iso's workshop passed calmly with smiles and lively moments, without unnecessary pauses. But the biggest change started when they built a new room for the newest family member. For almost a week, everyone worked side by side, putting their soul into every detail to finish everything. After some time, the work finally came to an end, and everyone burst out with joyful exclamations, admiring the finished room. Reich smiled and happily said that now, with the new room ready, they finally feel like a real family. For now, Diana quietly asked again, "Take care of her." and at the same time admitted how much fun it was for her to create something together just like that. Later, Iso asked if Diana thought she could help again whenever work appeared in the future. Diana answered without hesitation, "Of course I can," and added, "If I couldn't, I would never have come here." Hearing this, Iso handed her something. Diana's eyes widened with surprise as soon as she recognized the thing in his hands. It was her custom-made knife, the same as the others. Now she had her own to defend herself. Samia explained, "It is like proof, a sign that someone has already become part of the family." Diana smiled warmly, quietly and gratefully accepting this gesture. Meanwhile, Iso reminded her. She already knew how sharp the blade was, so it must be handled with extreme care. Diana nodded. There was no arguing here and involuntarily admired how beautiful it looked. After that, Iso suggested the idea to bring Diana's luggage inside since the work for today was already finished. And later that night, everyone finally fell asleep. The next day, they visited Camillo's shop. Camillo sincerely and warmly greeted the attractive young man standing right in front of him. This time he came with 3 women who accompanied him. Diana sincerely apologized to Camillo for causing him trouble every time they visited. Looking around, Iso noticed with surprise there were significantly more workers than before. Camillo, with a spark in his voice, said that thanks to Iso the business was going wonderfully. After the recent affairs with the Count's family, he managed to open a small shop in the capital, so the number of employees noticeably increased. And Iso immediately understood. This was business expansion, and for him great news. Then Camillo steered the conversation to the real reason Iso had come here initially. He was looking for another ore, and Iso immediately confirmed this. Then Camillo said that they had received a small tip from His Excellency. A batch of Poitakara had already arrived from the north and was roaming somewhere in the city. As soon as Iso heard this name, one word instantly flashed in his mind: mithril. It is a hurricane, the very same legendary metal. But in this world, such a rare raw material could only be obtained in the north, so Camillo told Iso if he wanted, he could bring him some. Iso did not hesitate. Immediately, without any doubts, he agreed to the offer. When the conversation finally ended, Iso and the others eventually set off. Soon they stopped to rest and had lunch in a cozy corner. During the break, Iso said that he had left Smith in the care of 2 others, especially Reich, and sincerely thanked her. Thanks to her efforts that day, they had excellent sales, so the goods did not run out. Iso was truly grateful to Reich for handling everything so well. Reich smiled and admitted that she also enjoyed listening to Iso and Camillo's stories about everything Iso had achieved in the capital, and Diana added that she had already heard these stories from her brother. To Iso, the capital seemed much livelier than the city they currently lived in. Against the backdrop of the eternal hustle and bustle and crowding of the capital, everything here looked quiet and peaceful. Looking around, Iso noticed a few people nearby and wondered, could they be travelers? For now, he quietly turned over in his mind his second life in this world. He thought he could simply work as an old blacksmith, but still understood if he got another amazing cheating power, he would probably travel the world like those adventurers. Suddenly, Samia asked if Iso had ever planned to set out on a journey, and this question unexpectedly threw him off balance. Iso immediately denied it and explained the only reason he went there was special circumstances. After everything he had experienced, he definitely did not want to return to that experience. But Samia still did not look convinced. Having heard his answer, she quietly stepped aside. Isel was confused by her own reaction and could not understand what had happened to Samia and Reich in recent days. Reich calmly said that the reason was in him. Diana agreed with Reich and honestly said what everyone felt. It seemed to them that Iso might simply disappear one day without a trace. She also added that Samia probably asked that question because she was afraid too. As soon as she said this, Iso quietly fell silent. Deep down he knew why they clung to these thoughts, because he really came from another world. However, now everything there was different than before. In a moment, Iso calmed the 3 women and promised he would not leave until he informed his family. Those words just escaped his lips, and the air around them immediately became clearer. Later, Iso noticed Samia was thoughtfully looking somewhere into the distance, and interested, he asked what had happened. Samia said the air smelled like rain, and looking at the direction of the wind, added she felt it would not let go for a long time. Iso then asked how long exactly, at least as she imagined it herself. Samia admitted she did not know for sure, but was confident it would not last longer than a week. Iso raised his eyes to the sky and quietly thought, the rain is unlikely to last more than 3 days, so we need to take advantage while there is a chance and collect water from the stream. Time passed and finally the rain started. As Sumia predicted, everything probably began around midnight, and the work for the day was simple: to replenish the supplies of sheet iron metal, because they had already used too much of it. Diana watched their actions with surprise until she noticed that they were making sheet metal themselves. And then it finally became clear to her why their weapons and equipment were so strong. Samya, without any hesitation, said that she was already stronger than ordinary people. The next day the rain still had not stopped, and while it poured outside, Iso lined everyone up to work on making basic models. Looking closely at a piece of metal, he quietly said that the quality was good. So he decided to forge himself a new knife. The old one he used during forging in the capital was already quite worn out. Nearby 3 women silently watched his work until he finally finished. Iso silently stared at the finished knife in his hand. Then Reich approached and watched with admiration as serious Iso transformed every time he worked. In her eyes, the finished knife looked incredibly beautiful. Diana also agreed. Although she was not as skilled in the craft as Reich, it was still clear to her the knife was simply incredible. Reich admitted that she did not fully understand everything, but still considered it incredible. Iso simply thanked for the compliment. Such words sincerely made him happy. Then Iso explained that in the capital, he would never have dared to do such a thing. What she heard stunned Reich, and she sharply asked if it was true. Iso confirmed without hesitation. He said that in the capital there was no choice. He had to melt the knife together with the metal, mix everything, and hammer it out just to make it work at all. But here he forged high-quality swords without any problems and quietly wondered, was there really something unusual hidden in this forge? And the whole trouble was that now he could not take a single step to test his theory. Since he did not intend to stay here at all, Iso saw nothing terrible in this, but deep down he knew, peace does not last forever, so sooner or later he would have to let the truth out. The rain did not stop for several more days. They tested new products and waited until it finally cleared up. And so, as always, the rainy day quietly passed. Finally, the dark clouds receded, and for the first time in several days the stars shone again. The next morning Samya woke up, delighted the sun had indeed returned. Reich happily summed up that now they could finally wash the laundry. Meanwhile, Diana admitted that she was already starting to worry. If the rain lasted any longer, mold would begin to appear everywhere. Samya then announced that after she finished washing, she would go hunting. Iso immediately noticed. That day Samya was unusually cheerful. Reich casually explained that she was probably happy because her arrows had finally been replenished. Hearing this, Iso smiled slightly and admitted that he was also glad. They liked them so much. Samya was truly glowing with happiness more than usual. Then Reich jokingly said that it was just girlish feelings, a girl's heart. Later Iso and Reich worked side by side, forging the sword together. But when Iso listened carefully, he suddenly noticed. The strikes of their 2 hammers on the forge sounded to him like a strange, almost musical twist, and their rhythm was about to form a melody. He quietly wondered, does Reich think the same? Some time passed. Iso suggested having dinner after work, and Reich immediately agreed. That evening dinner was finally served, and they both quietly thanked for the food before sitting down to eat together. While they ate, Iso suddenly asked Reich if she would sometimes like to go outside like Samya and Diana. Reich looked at him embarrassed and asked why he was asking that. Iso explained, unless I occasionally drop by the city or go out to wash otherwise, I live almost all the time in the forge. Reich admitted. To say that she really did not want to go outside would be untrue, but she immediately explained that dwarves are like that. It was a real pleasure for her to watch and learn Reich during the master's work. Iso nodded quietly. He understood and accepted her answer, and Reich afterwards thanked him for caring about her. Later Iso finally finished working on the sword and decided that it was enough for today. But at that very moment, there was such a loud knock on the door that everyone involuntarily turned and paid attention. A loud shout from the corridor broke the silence. Iso, are you here? Iso immediately recognized whose voice it was. He answered and immediately opened the door. Helen was standing on the threshold. She greeted him after such a long separation. Iso warmly welcomed her and invited her inside. While the 2 of them were drinking tea, Iso could not resist and spoke first. He asked Helen if her blade had been damaged or perhaps something similar had happened to it. But Helen only shook her head and explained. She was going to a battlefield far from here, so she asked him to bring the weapon into order and carefully inspect it before departure. Then she handed him the sword, and Iso quietly began to check the blade. Iso carefully examined the blade and asked if she used it often. Helen replied that she had trained diligently for about a week and then mostly used it against thieves and occasionally practiced strikes on logs. Focusing his gaze on the weapon, Iso said, "There are no serious visible damages, but certain traces still remain." At the same time, Iso quietly pondered how much strength Helen must have spent in battle to load his personally forged sword like that. Helen admitted the blade turned out to be even better than she had imagined. It cut incredibly easily and saved her life more than once. Hearing this, Iso quietly said he was glad to hear it, and Helen admitted, no matter how much she thanked, she still felt it was not enough. Yet despite everything, she wanted to speak truly and sincerely thanked Iso once again. Iso answered simply, "It is his job, so of course he will do it that way." Then they shook hands, and Helen's grip was so strong that Iso even felt pain. After the inspection, Iso said that the sword was still good enough to use for 6 months, but he still planned to carefully repair and adjust it, and Helen only wished him luck. Then Iso asked her to wait a little while he fixed everything. But Helen had one personal request. She asked to be allowed to observe the repair up close. Iso replied that he was not against it at all. Helen heard this and immediately rejoiced and could not hold back. And finally, she slapped him hard on the back out of excitement. They soon got down to repairs. Meanwhile, Reich and Helen silently stood nearby and watched as he worked. Iso carefully examined every part of the blade and gradually corrected all noticeable distortions. Soon the work was completed. He returned the sword to Helen and asked her to test it herself. Helen immediately swung the blade several times. She exclaimed right away that it was incredible. The sword now felt just as perfect as on the day she first received it. Hearing this, Iso praised Helen and emphasized how impressive it was that she noticed even such small changes that he had only slightly adjusted. Then Iso asked if there were any remaining problems with the blade. Helen immediately replied that everything felt completely normal. Then Iso asked if she wanted him to also replace the leather wrapping on the handle, but Helen refused. She had adjusted it herself, so the grip fit confidently in her hands. Hearing this, Iso simply nodded and immediately began repairing his second blade. While he worked, Helen quietly continued to watch him. Eventually, Iso asked if she really enjoyed watching such work. Helen honestly said yes. Every time she looked at his work, it seemed to her as if she herself had become a craftswoman. Later, she admitted, once her father made harnesses, so she grew up watching how various things came to life by his hands. But still, for various reasons, she eventually had to leave her home, and Iso became interested upon learning that her father was a saddler. This job also seemed incredibly fascinating to him. Suddenly, Helen asked if he was curious why she had left home at all. Iso calmly said that he usually does not ask women about their past. Helen clarified whether anything bad had ever happened to Iso because he listens to women about their past, and Iso calmly replied, maybe yes, and immediately added that if Helen wants to talk more about food, he would gladly listen to her as much as she wants. Hearing this, Helen just quietly smiled. Iso announced that the repair was finished and was already about to sharpen the blade, but at that moment a voice sounded, "I have returned home." As soon as Helen heard these words, her eyes sharply widened in surprise. Soon Samia greeted Helen and asked how she had been feeling lately. At the same time, Diana also froze upon seeing Helen there. Unable to hold back, Diana asked if she was really Helen, the very one known as Lightning Blade. Helen calmly, without any hesitation, confirmed it. As soon as she heard this, Diana was speechless from shock. Then Iso said to Helen, instead of payment for the repair, he wants her to train sparring with Diana. Helen asked again if such an arrangement really suited him, and Iso immediately assured her, yes, saying that while they train, he will finish sharpening the second blade. Helen without any hesitation agreed, and confidently asked to be given Diana's training in her hands, adding that for safety they would use wooden swords. Diana sincerely shone with happiness and immediately thanked Helen for agreeing after all. Helen noticed that Diana was going to fight with only one sword, and without hesitation decided she would also take only one. While Iso was focused on sharpening the blade, Helen and Diana nearby had already started sparring. Samia silently stood aside and watched how the fight unfolded. After some time, Iso finally managed to finish sharpening the weapon, and almost at the same moment Reich noticed. It seemed Helen and Diana had also paused the sparring. Diana looked exhausted, her legs barely trembling. She was gathering strength to finally catch her breath. Helen, on the contrary, looked full of energy as if she was not exerting herself at all. Iso later asked Helen how Diana had managed. Helen honestly said that Diana had a very strong foundation, but added, her fighting style was probably a bit too clean and correct. Iso immediately understood what she meant. Diana's fencing looked too simple, so it would probably be difficult for her to withstand experienced mercenaries who had survived for years on real battlefields. But Iso still believed Diana was already stronger than those royal knights he had fought before. Helendon asked if Iso himself personally trained Diana, and Iso confirmed, yes. Hearing this, Helen immediately put everything together, explained that Diana's feints and movements were very similar to Iso's style, so because of her familiarity with him, it was easy for her to handle it. Iso was sincerely impressed how Helen was able to recall the fighting habits and movements of a person with whom she had crossed swords only once. Meanwhile, Diana suddenly asked Daso, is it true that he fought Helen just 15 minutes ago? Iso confirmed without unnecessary worry and honestly admitted, holding two swords at the same time is really incredibly difficult. Hearing this, Diana finally realized, in this world there are still people much stronger than her. And then Helen said, come on, I'll also test my strength against Iso, but Iso immediately refused. Jokingly, he replied that he was just a simple blacksmith, so he could by no means compare to such a true mercenary like her. It was already dusk, so Iso suggested Helen spend the night here. Going through the forest at night would be too dangerous. Helen sincerely thanked Iso for allowing her to stay overnight, and he replied that tomorrow they would leave for the city anyway, so she could go with him. The next day, they finally reached the city. As soon as Iso greeted one of the guards, he immediately recognized him, but his attention instantly shifted to Helen. Carefully, the guard asked if this woman next to him was the same one known as the Blade of Lightning. Iso calmly confirmed he knew her. What he heard only increased the guard's curiosity. Kit directly asked Iso, who are you really? Iso calmly answered that he was an ordinary blacksmith. After that, the whole group moved on straight to Camilo's shop. Even before their arrival, Helen stepped aside and explained that they would meet later. Iso ordered her to definitely return alive from the upcoming expedition. Later at Camilo's shop, Camilo immediately asked if this was Iso's newest product, a halberd, and Iso confirmed just as quickly. He said he wanted Camilo to sell this weapon to the Count for his guard, which is based in the city. Camilo agreed to the request without any problems and immediately let Iso know that he understood everything. But he did not stop there. Camilo informed Iso that the Apothecary shipment had not yet arrived, although another order had already come in. After that, Camilo handed Iso a piece of material. As soon as he looked at it, an open surprise flashed across his face. It was mithril. Camilo explained that the client stubbornly insisted the mithril must be forged specifically into a rapier. As soon as Iso heard this, he was immediately drawn in, and he asked Camilo if it was possible to engrave the emblems of his workshop somewhere hidden on the finished weapon. Camilo just nodded. That was no problem. So the matter was finally settled. Iso officially agreed to the request. For Iso, this became a real passion. Finally, he could work with a mineral, not just iron. Later, Iso was announced that they would immediately begin forging mithril. This also inflamed Reich. She literally shone with curiosity. She admitted that she had never seen mithril forged live, not even in her parents' smithy, so now she wanted to carefully study the entire process. Iso agreed without hesitation. Soon Iso placed the mithril into the forge and got to work. Usually, simple silver would have long since melted at the temperatures required for working iron, but mithril showed no sign of melting. Finally, Iso found the exact temperature when the material finally began to yield to processing, and as soon as this happened, he struck the mithril with a hammer. Usually, after such a blow, the metal would dent, but the mithril changed almost not at all. But despite everything, Iso did not stop. He struck it again and again, until after several blows he admitted that, honestly, it was annoying. Reich asked if it was difficult to forge such a thing even with Iso's special hammer, but Iso had already noticed another problem. As soon as he struck 4 or 5 times, the temperature of the mithril sharply dropped. Quietly, Iso whispered that this project would bring him a lot of trouble. Hearing this, Reich replied, mithril has never been a material that an ordinary blacksmith could handle. For Iso, working with mithril felt as if he was forcing himself to chew an extremely hard piece of food. Difficult, troublesome, and that was it. Everything ended there. At least he believed that the very possibility of working with mithril justified all the suffering. Compared to ordinary metals, stretching mithril to the same length took 2 to 3 times longer. It was incredibly hard, and forging drained a lot of strength. But despite this, the metal itself was surprisingly easy to work with. Peering intently at the surface, Iso noticed that there were almost no irregularities, so he could fully concentrate on stretching and not chase after minor flaws. At the same time, he clearly felt how delicate the material was. every strike required maximum attention and precise control, because even a moment of inattention during forging could ruin the entire process. Therefore, Aizo decided to fully use his ability to be cunning while working on the blade. Meanwhile, Samia quietly noted, the hammer's knock was a true delight. For Reich, it sounded almost like a musical instrument being played, and Diana agreed too. She admitted that listening to it was strangely calming and pleasant. Later, Iso addressed the three women and asked if they were bored watching him work for so long, especially since lunch had already passed. But all three sincerely replied, no, they were not bored at all. A little later, Iso ordered Reich to bring the whetstone, and Reich asked with slight surprise if the mithril needed to be hardened or tempered. Iso assured her it did not. Mithril itself was strong and durable, so all those procedures were completely unnecessary. Examining the blade, Iso quietly admired how incredible the materials from another world turned out to be. At the same time, he felt the ruthlessness of mithril. If you even slightly misalign or skilllessly grind it, the blade would instantly go awry. Therefore, he kept telling himself again and again, stay focused and vigilant until the very end of the process. Meanwhile, the three women silently watched his work, never once looking away. Finally, after waiting a little, Iso announced, the blade is ready. As soon as she heard this, Diana was overwhelmed with admiration and she quickly asked if she could personally test this weapon. But Iso immediately refused, not yet, because Tang still hasn't been properly wrapped. But still, Iso told her, if she really wants to test the sword, she must be careful the hilt is not yet wrapped. Diana agreed without hesitation and carefully took the sword. As soon as she took the weapon in her hands, she immediately felt it fits incredibly easily in the palm. Then Iso explained, supposedly, an old proverb says that mithril weapons are light like a feather. As soon as Diana heard this, her excitement flared even stronger, and she immediately suggested testing everything outside. Outside the workshop, Diana began to hone her strikes and sword stances when in hand's mithril blade. Iso quietly noticed, Diana and her brother are really similar in many things. At the same time, he couldn't shake the thought about the very essence of the weapon. The weapon was created to inflict pain on people. It could take life, but it could also protect and save. A small knife or a long sword, the essence is the same, and the only real difference is in length. Iso noticed Diana and guessed, perhaps it is precisely because the weapon is so light that her movements became much faster. Diana agreed immediately. The sword is incredibly light during a swing, much less stamina is spent, so the body seems to lighten during movement. Suddenly, Samia called out to Diana and suggested using one of the logs nearby as a target. Diana agreed without any hesitation. In a moment, she carefully adjusted her stance and decisively struck forward with the mithril sword. The blade smoothly passed straight through the log without pause, not for a moment. Diana instantly froze in shock, and at the same time, both Samia and Reich were no less stunned when they pulled the blade back. Diana whispered, confessing, the sword is simply incredible. Diana listened carefully to the sensations and explained, there was almost no resistance, it seemed to her, as if she had plunged the sword into empty air, not solid wood. Hearing this, Iso quietly remarked that the weapon seemed to be working perfectly. He carefully examined the blade and was convinced, no warping, no chipping, everything even, flawless. Then Iso nudged Diana, next time stab the sword into something harder. This time he pointed to a metal sheet, and Diana nodded in agreement again. As soon as she pushed the blade forward, the same thing happened. The mithril sword passed cleanly and without resistance through the metal, just as smoothly as before. And when they later checked the blade itself, there was not even the slightest scratch on it. At that moment, Iso quietly sank into thoughts about something truly very important. It was an ordinary kitchen knife or a hero's sword. The weapon remained the same. Everything depended on one thing, how exactly it was used. It could save lives or end them. Because of this, Iso began F. He felt maybe he had just come up with something truly daring. Staring at the blade, he saw his eyes in the reflection. Old memories slowly surfaced from the depths of his memory. First, how he first handed the knife to Samia, then how he personally killed a bear, and then the moment when he took another person's life. These memories made Iso soberly realize, even now, deep in his soul, he still hesitates whether it is worth releasing such a powerful weapon into the world. He did not believe that a single sword could completely reshape the world, but the destructive power of the weapon he forged on commission was a completely different matter. The blades could be made of mithril, or even stronger than ordinary steel. In that case, they would destroy not only people, their capabilities would be much broader. A weapon that did not break or bend, with a blade that remained incomparably sharp, the cutting edge knew no limits. a sword capable of splitting even solid rock if someone stood in the way. The one who wielded it simply carved a path with one strike. One such a weapon could even decide the fate of entire wars. Iso understood all this very clearly, and at the same time felt something else. Thanks to the cheating abilities he received from another world, he had a real chance to directly influence the future of this world. But Iso could not stop wondering, did he really have the right to do this from the very beginning? Meanwhile, three women noticed that Iso suddenly became completely quiet, and Mia gently asked if he was okay. Her voice reached Iso, but he was still drowning in his own thoughts. In fact, those same doubts had already been gnawing at him back when he forged the sword for Helen. But something else was more important. He had already intervened in history Itzelfand in the ancestral relic of the Emil family. But Iso also realized, if he continued to hesitate over such thoughts, he would never be able to do the blacksmith's work properly. That is why Iso quietly made a decision for himself, to dispel as quickly as possible the doubts pressing on his heart. Iso suddenly called everyone so that they immediately focused on him. Three women did not lose a single second. They looked at him and asked what happened. After a short pause, Iso admitted that he hesitated, whether he should really release this sword into the world. He explained, if the weapon is used incorrectly, it can easily turn into a real disaster. The destruction was already visible during the tests, so he could not shake the thought of what would happen if this sword ever ended up in the wrong hands. This thought truly frightened him, not only because of the sword itself, but also because of the future it could shatter. Iso quietly admitted, he does not know if he can truly take responsibility for what this weapon might one day cause. No matter how much he pondered, the anxiety never subsided. He did not even realize how those thoughts spontaneously escaped from his lips. At the same time, Iso wondered if they would now call him pathetic. Outwardly he might have looked younger, but inside he was still a man approaching 40. He even had a fleeting thought. It was enough to show weakness, and those three women might be disappointed and eventually leave. But if that really happened, then maybe it meant only one thing: he himself was not up to it. But instead of awkward silence, Iso suddenly caught a quiet giggle, and it truly embarrassed him. Later, Diana noticed that even Iso still remains human. She confessed, since he constantly did such incredible things, she always thought he didn't care about all these everyday worries. Reich also agreed. For her, Iso was so extraordinary that she was sure he would never bother with such trifles. But she firmly, as if chopping, explained, responsibility lies with the one who uses the weapon, not with the one who forged it. She was taught that from childhood, and indeed, as she said, most blacksmiths thought the same. Diana said that a weapon can be a sword that protects the country, or a tool for attack. It all depends on who exactly holds it. Therefore, she directly told Iso, he doesn't have to bear responsibility for every possible consequence alone. Hearing this, Iso fell silent again. Samia quietly added that if the burden really weighs heavily on him, then he won't have to carry it alone. They are family, so they can share this burden with him. Before the finale, Iso paused the silence for a moment. Finally, he laughed, barely audibly. Then he sincerely thanked each of them from the bottom of his heart. Immediately after that, three women hugged Iso tightly and sincerely encouraged him. With their support, the heavy uncertainty in his heart began to gradually recede. Finally, Iso decisively declared, now everything is fine. He said he would no longer hesitate. Clenching his fists so hard it hurt, Iso finally gathered himself. He was given a second life as a creator, so his role in this world was to create. He longed to create what he loved and release his things into the world, hoping someday they would be useful to someone. The most important thing was different. Now he was no longer alone. His family stood beside him, supporting him. Samia noticed that Iso now looked much better than before, and Iso immediately retorted, I've always been cool, which confused Samia even more. Soon they all burst out laughing together. Thanks to the support of Iso's family, he finally truly felt everything will be resolved, and after that, he firmly decided enough for today. The next day, Iso fully immersed himself in finishing the rapier. He carved the guard, refined the decorative parts of the hilt. Because the mithril was too difficult to work with, he turned these parts from steel, and at the same time secretly engraved a small cat emblem of his workshop on the part hidden under the guard. After some time, the rapier was finally ready. As always, Rek immediately began carefully inspecting every tiny detail of the finished weapon. Now Iso no longer hesitated. He released the rapier into the world, and later took the finished weapon to Camillo's shop. While they were shopping and chatting about the latest news and events across the region, Iso suddenly received another request from the Count himself during the conversation to make a halberd. As Camillo explained, there were currently no large wars or large-scale monster extermination campaigns, but in distant lands minor troubles did not cease. From time to time, clashes with monsters flared up, and here and there smaller conflicts arose. For example, disputes over water rights between lands. During their journey, Diana kept looking around incessantly, as if snooping in search of something. Iso immediately noticed this, and said aloud that she had been behaving like that since morning. Later nearby, they saw a wolf cub, and it was familiar. A few days ago, they had already come across the same one, because at this time of year, wolves often roam the forest. On a recent hunt, they even came across a she-wolf with her wolf cubs, and since then Diana has behaved the same way, alert, constantly looking around while traveling. Iso quietly noticed that the wolves in that forest are strangely intelligent, and even suggested, if they were regularly fed, they could become tame enough for him to keep them as pets. Hearing this, Samya quickly reminded everyone, that's why they need to be silent nearby. Iso immediately agreed. Later, they finally returned home. As soon as they arrived, they immediately saw someone was already waiting in front of the house. It was a woman in a hood holding something to her chest. After a moment, she knocked on the door. Iso shouted that he was coming and opened the door. As soon as he clearly saw the woman, his surprise immediately became noticeable. Casting a quick glance at her appearance, Iso immediately noticed pointed ears and instantly understood. Before him was an elf woman. The elf politely asked if this was Iso's workshop, and Iso just as quickly confirmed, yes, it was. Hearing this, the elf sighed with relief and said she had a request. She had come not just anywhere but to ask him for help. Iso calmly said that such a conversation should not be held just on the street, so he was the first to invite her inside. The elf politely thanked him and entered the workshop. Meanwhile, Reich immediately brought her some water. As soon as they settled a bit, Iso asked what exactly she needed his help with. Then the elf carefully showed the object she had been carrying with her all this time. As soon as she removed the wrapping that concealed it, before them lay a broken sword made of mithril. She said that she wants the weapon to be repaired. Looking at him, Iso quietly realized what was going on. Although the blade was thin, he immediately understood. This was once a real longsword. Then Iso asked the elf how far she wanted to go with the restoration. She replied that she dreamed of seeing the sword fully returned to its original appearance, and if that proved impossible, she would agree to any repair that Iso could make. Next, Iso asked if she had traveled there alone. The elf nodded. She came alone. She explained that on the way she used a concealment spell so she wouldn't be noticed, then awkwardly asked if that would be a problem, and Iso was a little surprised by this. But he answered calmly. Since she got there by herself, he didn't care by what means exactly. And so, when it was announced that Iso officially accepted the request, the elf immediately raised her voice in surprise and asked if he really meant that. As soon as she realized how loudly she had spoken, she immediately apologized. Iso simply calmed her worries. No problem at all. Then he asked if there was any specific deadline for the repair. The elf explained that it would be better to do it sooner, but if possible, she hoped to manage it in about 2 weeks. Iso quietly nodded, understood. As soon as she heard this, her face immediately blossomed with joy. Later, returning from hunting, Samya and Diana immediately felt there was a guest in the workshop. As soon as Samya looked at the woman, she instantly understood an elf was standing before her. Iso explained that the elf came to ask to repair the sword. After that, the elf politely introduced herself and said that her name was Liddy. Diana also introduced herself and said that she currently lives in Iso's workshop. She warmly added that she was pleased to meet Liddy. Meanwhile, Samya was still a bit irritated, so she also briefly introduced herself. Reich named her and explained that she was a student working under Iso's supervision in the workshop. Then Iso added that all three of them were like family to her. Hearing this, Liddy cautiously said she has one more request. She wants to watch every day while Iso repairs the sword. Iso, trying once again to somehow explain herself, quickly realized that this meant for her the weapon had to be extremely important, so he said he had absolutely nothing against it. Liddy immediately sighed with relief and sincerely thanked him. But Liddy asked one more thing. If she had to stay nearby during the repair, would Iso allow her to temporarily settle in a small corner of the garden? She cautiously inquired if everything would be all right, and Iso instantly noticed. Dangerous beasts constantly roam nearby. But Liddy calmly laid everything out. The beasts were unlikely to come close to the area around the workshop. According to her, the magical power enveloping the house was extremely dense. Iso was immediately stunned with surprise, and Liddy continued. The Black Forest itself had much more magical power than most places in the world, and around Iso's workshop it was especially dense, and that was why, as she said, no trees grew near the house. Ordinary beasts simply avoided them. In fact, Lydia initially decided that Iso deliberately chose this place, as if he already knew everything in advance. She even admitted that because of this she was impressed by him. But Iso honestly replied, he actually knew nothing about it. The lady said that she had previously seen a mithril rapier forged by Iso, and when she saw it again, she was convinced. Iso knows how to weave magical power purely and naturally directly into the materials themselves. For her, this probably explained why such a dense magical energy had gathered around the workshop. Iso heard this, waved his hand indifferently, and said it was simply the instinct of a craftsman, but he would never admit that in reality, everything was connected with cheap powers he obtained by coming from another world. As soon as he heard Lydia's explanation, it finally clicked for him. He understood something important about the magical power itself, putting together everything she had said. Iso began to understand why it was never possible to forge weapons in the city like here. The magical power around was too weak, and did not allow the materials to truly saturate in the same way that happened here naturally, even without his knowledge, and this logic seemed absolutely flawless to him. Eventually, Iso decided to temporarily set this topic aside, and firmly said that he would never allow Lydia to sleep simply in the forest. Instead, he offered her a guest room in the workshop. But suddenly Lydia asked, would this really suit Iso's 3 wives? As soon as she said this, Iso and those 3 women froze in surprise at the same moment. Iso quickly explained that this was his family, but not at all his wives, and then again insisted, do not hesitate and stay there. Lydia, hearing this, gratefully accepted the offer and said she would gladly take advantage of it, while Iso quietly recalled to himself, such misunderstandings had happened before. Meanwhile Diana enthusiastically asked if they would really live together with the elf now, and Iso calmly corrected her, and explained that it was more supervision than anything else. Still, Iso admitted that he was not very worried, so for now he decided just to have dinner together and rest tonight. After that he asked Samia what they had managed to catch during today's hunt, and she answered, leaf birds. Having felt this, Iso immediately ordered Diana and Reiku to prepare the guest room, while he himself, together with Samia, began plucking 5 birds they had brought. Meanwhile, Iso quietly pondered something completely different. Do elves really eat meat at all? Just then, Lady approached closer and she asked if she could also help with the preparations, and explained that in her native village, she constantly did exactly that kind of work. This instantly impressed Samia. She had always believed that elves survive only on fruits. In fact, Iso himself felt the same, but Lydia laid everything out clearly. Almost everyone thinks that way about elves as soon as they leave their forests. They mostly eat vegetables. Hearing this, Iso realized, this image of elves probably exists worldwide, but he still noticed that elves clearly ate meat too. Lydia did not hesitate for a moment. She immediately confirmed, and added that in their forests they often hunted birds and deer. She added, elves usually ate more vegetables, especially the potatoes that grew in their fields. They got much less meat, and it came much more irregularly. Hearing this, Iso quietly understood. A forest like the Black Forest was probably unusual, at least because of how much game lived there. Then Iso handed Lydia one of the birds and said he sincerely appreciated her help. Lydia instantly nodded in agreement. From then on, they officially began repairing the broken sword that Lydia had brought with her, first to gather all the broken fragments together, as if assembling a puzzle. Usually, if the weapon were made of ordinary steel, the metal's structure could be disrupted during hardening, and after joining the fragments, it would be extremely difficult to restore the original strength and flexibility, but this sword was forged from mithril, so they didn't even have to think about it. Carefully squeezing the broken mithril sword in his hands, Iso quietly admitted, putting all these fragments back together would not be easy. Yet he immediately decided, they need to start right now. During this, Lydia suddenly asked Iso if he could use magic himself. Iso casually replied that, although he claimed to have magic, he was actually only capable of igniting a few small flames and summoning weak gusts of wind. When Lydia heard this, a trace of surprise involuntarily slipped out. With surprise, she said that even to master that much magic, normal training is usually required, and she found it very strange that someone like Iso knew so little about his own magical power. Iso immediately understood. As soon as he said this, Lydia's smile became a little more threatening. In reality, his magic was just a fragment of cheating abilities that awakened as soon as he found himself in this world. He had never truly studied or trained in magic. At the same time, he realized something else. Samia, Reik, and Diana also knew almost nothing about magic. Soon Iso began heating the broken mithril fragment. While Reich carefully helped him, they worked together. Instructor Iso carefully and precisely strike the parts against each other so that their mating surfaces reconnect correctly. Unlike steel, mithril did not require borax or similar substances to bond firmly. Iso already understood. Joining fragments in this way is technically possible, but the part of him that liked to cheat kept whispering to his body temperature control and hammer handling skills are incredibly important in this process. And soon Iso noticed something troubling. The temperature had already begun to deviate from the ideal limit needed for the repair. Iso struggled with restoring the broken mithril sword, and the task suddenly became incredibly difficult. Nearby, Liddy watched the work intently, and worry froze on her face without words. Finally, she turned to Iso and asked if he really believed he could manage the repair. Iso honestly admitted it would be hard, yet he still held on to his faith the sword could be restored and warned Liddy that the whole process would take a lot of time. The lady quietly accepted the answer and whispered that she understood. Deep down, Iso wanted to speed up the work as much as possible, but at the same time he understood, if he hurried even a little, the fragile balance inside the blade would instantly collapse. So he decided to proceed carefully, no matter how long it took. Watching his work, Liddy suddenly asked Iso if he really saw the flow of magical power in the sword, and these words struck him right in the heart, unexpectedly. Iso asked again if that was really what she saw. Liddy explained that his precise strikes with the blade prevented the flow of magical power from falling apart. That was why she believed he felt it. Iso tried to put his understanding into words. He was only trying not to let the shining grains and particles he saw scatter during this. And as soon as he described it this way, Liddy exclaimed excitedly that that was exactly it, and Iso blushed because her face suddenly was too close. Sensing this, Liddy quickly apologized and stepped back, then calmly said that what Iso was talking about was the magical power itself. Then Lady spoke. As expected, Iso truly feels the magical power from nature. He just hadn't noticed it before because he didn't know what it was. At that moment, Iso finally realized something truly important, that strange thing he vaguely saw in this. It turned out that all this time, it was simultaneously magical power. He noticed a few more strange things. The materials seemed to have an internal structural imbalance, but he silently wondered if this was not directly related to the magical power itself. Lydia finally said that one of her questions about Iso found an answer, and this somewhat relieved Iso. He admitted he was glad to hear it. Later, Iso carefully took the mithril sword in his hands and he closely examined the repaired areas. Externally, the fragments fit perfectly, but as soon as he looked deeper, he saw something else. Particles of light streaming along the blade seemed not to hold properly. The magic broke where the fragments joined. Even when the sword's body was polished to a shine, inside its magic remained torn at the joints. Iso realized, if he just patched the form and continued to cut with this sword in such a state, sooner or later, it would lead to serious problems. At the same time, he felt differently. This sword had already been used so intensively that it shattered into fragments. Now it must be strong enough to withstand such a load once more. After that, Iso called Liddy closer and showed her. He pointed to a specific area of the sword and said, he sees absolutely clearly the magical power breaks exactly here. After this, he returned to Reich and asked if she saw the same thing. Reich hesitated, then honestly admitted that she felt only vaguely, and Iso immediately realized. Ordinary people probably hardly feel magical power. Then Iso asked Liddy if it would be dangerous to leave the sword in such a condition, and Liddy confirmed without hesitation, yes, it would be a problem. Iso said that technically the fragments can be joined, and the sword restored to its original form. And there was one more way. If they completely reforged the sword, they could finally remove the interruption in the flow of magical power. He also clarified, by reforging the sword, he would be able to reproduce its original appearance as accurately as possible. As soon as he finished speaking, Iso looked at Liddy and asked what she wanted to do. The lady paused for a moment and carefully considered her decision. After all, finally she dared and chose recasting. But still, Iso warned her one last time. Once the sword is reforged, it cannot be returned to its exact original state, so is she really willing to accept this? Lady calmly replied, everything is fine. She firmly ordered Iso to reforge the sword. It was most important to her to restore it, so that it could be used again as before. Iso quietly whispered to Liddy that he understood her decision, and asked her to take care of everything else, would only handle this. When everyone agreed and everything was resolved, they resumed the repairs, and Iso paused for a moment, gathered his thoughts and prepared himself mentally. He was suddenly struck. Now he had to create a thing worthy of Liddy's very determination. Anything less, and the good reputation of his workshop would have been cast into shadow. To restore the sword from the very beginning and without mistakes, Iso first made a wooden mold from the collected fragments. This allowed him to reproduce the original shape of the weapon as accurately as possible. With heated mithril, which was hammered flat into plates, the fragments were layered one on top of another, tightly bound with rope, then reheated and hammered relentlessly until they slowly fused into a single whole. New pieces of mithril were piled on, carefully forged together, folded back and forged again endlessly until the day burned out, yet the restoration still held firm. The next day the workshop was raised again without any pauses. The work resumed immediately. While Samia and Diana went nearby to gather fruit together, Iso held the sword and suddenly noticed something amiss. It seemed to have become harder than it was before. He became curious. He called Lydia and asked if the magic in the sword had intensified, because even working with the metal now was significantly harder. Lydia carefully examined the sword, and confirming that the magical power had indeed increased, praised Iso. How he had woven magic into the weapon was incredibly skillful. Hearing this, Iso quietly pondered. Could it be that mithril naturally hardens the more magic it contains? Once, when forging a rapier, he had not noticed this so clearly, so he decided. The reason lies in the purity of the mithril itself. Still, he decided to continue despite everything. Although Iso had not consciously noticed this before, it was now clear. Each strike of his hammer charged the mithril with magic by itself. After each strike, particles of magical energy became increasingly numerous and settled more evenly inside the metal, and the mithril slowly but undeniably hardened and densified. Sweat slowly trickled down Izo's face, and he quietly admitted to himself, "This is truly exhausting work." So in the end, Izo decided it's time to stop working for today. What he saw hinted that stretching the reforged mithril back into shape would take much longer than he had hoped. And just then, Samia suddenly called him from outside. She explained, while returning from gathering fruits, their bag caught on a branch and tore everything they had collected spilled around. Then she asked Iso to come and help gather it back, and he agreed without hesitation. Before leaving the workshop, Iso asked Reich for permission to start cleaning everything possible, everything left inside. Reich immediately nodded and agreed without any doubts. Outside, Samia led them along and explained that the needed place was just around the corner. Eventually, they reached where Diana was already waiting, and as soon as they approached, Diana quietly asked everyone to be silent, and Iso looked confused at their strange behavior. Carefully approaching closer, Sumia pulled out some draw. She pulled dried meat from her pocket and threw it nearby. After a few moments, 2 wolf cubs cautiously peeked out from the bushes. As soon as Diana saw them, she was utterly stunned seeing the wolf cubs. Watching the little wolf cubs up close, Iso quietly admitted, their ears, tails, and eyes really made them incredibly cute. Diana immediately agreed with him. Later, they returned home, and as soon as Iso stepped over the threshold, he immediately felt something was wrong here. Next to Reich and Liddy, he clearly saw how the stream of magical energy flowed and pulsed. Reich said that while they waited, Lydia taught her to feel the flow of magical power. She admitted that she still wasn't very good at sensing magical energy, and Liddy explained, dwarves naturally sense the state of ores and materials better than the magical power itself. So while she was here, it was a great opportunity to properly teach Reich, and finally asked Iso if he agreed to such an arrangement. Iso immediately replied, that would be simply wonderful. Deep down, Iso knew. He was basically relying only on his cheating ability, so he definitely wouldn't teach Reich real magic, and for her, it was a chance worth valuing. If studying magic someday allowed Reich to create even better weapons and tools, then later she could return to the family workshop with pride. Later, Iso suddenly remembered something extremely important. He quietly examined the materials, checking that everything fit and confirmed both the size and placement were correct. Then Iso began crafting something out of wood. After some time, he carefully placed salt and water nearby like a sign. The work was finally completed. Next to this, he built a tiny house, a simple Shinto shrine. Iso considered it rough, unclear, almost clumsy in appearance. Yet still, without such a thing in his workshop, he was strangely tormented by unease. Meanwhile, Iso quietly and dreamily pondered, what will the gods of this world say when someone from another world ends up here? He still hoped they would forgive him. As soon as the 4 women woke up, they went outside and saw that it was sunny. They immediately agreed. Probably, this is a wonderful day to wash the laundry. Meanwhile, Samia noticed how Iso was secretly doing something in the room. Seeing this, the others approached closer to look as well. Then Wright asked Izo what exactly he was doing. Izo explained that it was a ritual passed down from the north to pray to the god. Diana pointed her finger at that tiny, strange little house and asked if that was what he meant. Iso confirmed and explained, it is something like a miniature temple that is placed in every household. Reich asked if such customs generally occur in the north, and Iso honestly admitted, maybe it is just a family tradition, he is not even sure if it really works. Samia could not resist and immediately asked if they could join as well. Liddy was also interested and politely asked if she could join. Iso replied that of course she had the right. Soon all five sincerely and together took part in the ritual. Izo still did not know whether the god, about whom it was supposedly said to live in this sanctuary, actually existed in this world. But despite doubts, everyone silently bowed their heads and prayed with them. And so another usual routine quietly settled into their days quietly and mundanely. When everything was over, Iso announced, breakfast is ready. Praying before the sanctuary, where the presence of the deity was not guaranteed, he fervently hoped today's work would end safely and the hunt would finally succeed. He dreamed that the food would be tasty, and his family would continue to spend days together laughing, as always. Iso announced that the work was not yet finished that day. Wright dived into the task with ordinary model knives, while Samia and Diana nearby were engaged in casting and wood carving. Then the work on the mythical scroll continued relentlessly. Step by step they hammered the metal, bringing it closer and closer to its original form. Working with mithril required absolute concentration for Iso. It was like running at full speed on a thin rope high in the air. Just a slight wrong strike during forging, and the magical power in the metal instantly crumbled and disappeared. That is why working with mithril was a real challenge for ordinary blacksmiths. They did not understand the magical power and thought that without it nothing could be moved here. And the one who truly knew how to hold magic in his hands would become a mage rather than devote himself to blacksmithing. So it is no wonder that only a few in the world truly knew how to work with mithril. Although the work was exhausting, Iso still believed it was worth it for the sake of that beautiful sound born from the hammer strikes. Later, during a break, Iso asked Liddy if she really liked sitting here and watching them work every day. Lydia honestly admitted, under normal circumstances, she probably would have already gotten bored, but Iso's work was not ordinary at all, so watching her never became tedious. Then Lydia casually added one more thing. Elves live incredibly long, so time passes differently for them. Days often seem much shorter than to humans, and these words clearly shocked the other three women. Meanwhile, Iso quietly began to wonder whether Samia was actually younger than she seemed, and at the same time, he pondered whether she perceives time as if it stretches much longer. The lady added that even the sound itself was amazingly beautiful. In the entire elven village, you wouldn't find a forge that sounded as pleasant as Iso's workshop. Full of curiosity, Iso asked if the sound of forging changes depending on who works with the metal. Lydia nodded and convincingly confirmed, yes, indeed. The more skillfully magical power was woven into mithril, the more beautiful the sound became. And the purer the mithril was, the easier it was to work with it properly. Such praise naturally encouraged Iso, and mithril became harder each time magical power was infused into it, so every new improvement required even more time and effort. Iso knew this. Too long a concentration on the same thing harms both body and mind. Therefore, in Iso's workshop, everyone made sure to rest properly on weekends and holidays, and recharge. That's how they kept their fighting spirit. Next, Iso dived into the river to fetch water. And on the way, he quietly thought, finally, for the first time in a long while, he had slept soundly, so thanks to this full sleep, he felt energetic again. But while he was still wandering through the forest, Iso suddenly froze. Someone was nearby, and he immediately felt it. And there, right in front of the tree, stood Liddy with her eyes closed. In a moment, Liddy slowly opened her eyes and looked at Iso. Iso quietly greeted her, good morning, and added that it is usually dangerous for someone to be outside alone. At least, that's usually the case. The lady calmly agreed, but immediately explained, with such dense magical power, ordinary beasts do not come close, but places filled with magic often attract monsters. Iso asked Liddy if monsters could suddenly appear here because of the accumulation of magical energy. Liddy answered just as calmly that this happens rarely. She said even when those who lived in the forest eventually turned into monsters, their true nature usually did not change. But sometimes they became much more aggressive than ever before. And she also warned that one should approach caves where magical forces stagnate strongly with maximum caution. Hearing this, Iso froze for a moment in silence. The bear he met earlier was probably one of those. So Iso asked if it was better to keep animals in this area, and Liddy immediately confirmed, it is indeed dangerous. So if someone was not fully prepared to handle an emergency situation on their own, it was better to avoid it. Iso immediately understood where she was leading. Everyone who kept animals, there had to be ready to take responsibility if something went wrong. After that, Iso asked Liddy what exactly she used to do in the forest. And he quickly added, if the conversation is delicate, she might simply ignore the question. The lady answered without hesitation that there was nothing secret here. She was simply absorbing magical power, and this thought slightly embarrassed Iso, so he asked what exactly she meant. Then the lady explained, elves, besides ordinary food, also need magical power for a full life. When this was said, Iso finally had a click in his head. That is why elves were so rarely seen in cities where magical power was weak. After he told Liddy that he would return first, Iso quietly confessed to himself. He finally understood everything, because before he had no idea about such things. But at the last moment, when he was already about to leave, the women suddenly called him. She asked if he really was no longer going to ask her any questions. Iso calmly replied, there are many things in life that are better not to ask about, and he himself knew this very well. Having said this, he quietly walked away. Later in the workshop, Iso informed Rake, only stretching the mithril into the required shape remained. By the holiday, he managed to return the reforged mithril to its original length, so, using the previously made form as a reference, he carefully restored the sword's original shape step by step. Meanwhile, Iso finally reached the final stage of the process. During the work, I very carefully asked Liddy one thing, whether she objected to answering. I was incredibly eager to know how her mithril sword had shattered into so many fragments at all. Liddy held her breath for a moment before finally daring to answer. Iso explained why he asked. He quietly noted that a sword made of mithril, broken into countless fragments, was supposed to withstand something truly extraordinary, and if he could find out what exactly caused it, he might be able to make a version that would endure such an event next time. Having heard this, Liddy cautiously replied. She could not reveal many details because the matter involved magic. Yet she added, if special procedures are followed, a weapon made of mithril can be turned into a conduit of magic by extracting the hidden magical powers from it. Liddy said that her sword had been kept in the village for a long time precisely for this, until an incident occurred that required it to be used beyond its usual limits. But when it was pushed too far, it finally shattered into pieces. Hearing this, Iso immediately understood everything. Liddy truly needed a skilled blacksmith who could restore the weapon and properly refill it with magic. As soon as he sorted everything out in his mind, Iso quietly thanked her for agreeing to tell him. As the 2-week deadline steadily approached, Iso kept working on the mithril sword, carefully applying the final touches, gradually perfecting every detail. A little more time and the sword was ready. Iso quietly whispered to Liddy that the work was finished and invited her to look at the weapon with her own eyes. The lady looked intently at the restored sword, and 3 women nearby held their breath, waiting for her reaction. In a moment, Liddy smiled. She immediately thanked Iso and confessed that the finished sword turned out even better than she had hoped. As soon as these words escaped her lips, 3 women together burst out with an admiring exclamation, but it was the phrase, better than expected, that actually embarrassed Iso. Somewhere deep inside, he quietly asked himself if he had overdone it by reforging it. If so, then maybe this result could really be called a true success. Liddy smiled warmly at him in response and continued. According to her, not only was the shape of the sword perfectly restored now, it had significantly more magical power than before. And this really great improvement would help exactly in what the sword was intended for. Hearing this, Iso finally exhaled with deep relief. Liddy raised the issue of payment and explained. Although they initially agreed only verbally, she still wanted to make sure that such a solution really suited. Then she revealed what she had been clutching in her hand until now. They were 5 shining gold coins, and next to them lay a flat plate resembling a precious stone. Lydia said that a weapon with such magical power would usually cost much more, but honestly admitted, this was really the last amount they could pay. Hearing this, Iso barely shook his head. Liddy herself had provided the original materials, so he sincerely believed that the payment was already too large. Then, after thinking a little, Iso returned one of the gold coins to her. Instead, he proposed an exchange. Would she give him vegetable seeds from her village for that 1 gold coin? If, of course, it would not be too big a burden for the village, then she could simply pass the seeds to Camillo in the city. Lydia objected that she had already lived with them and used their hospitality during the visit. Iso replied, She also spent time teaching Reich various things about magical power, so he considered these seeds rather as payment for the lesson. Having felt this, the lady quietly smiled and said that in that case she would gladly accept his proposal. Later, near the workshop, the lady sincerely thanked everyone once again for all the help they had given her. She admitted that during her stay she experienced many exciting things. There they created amazing things and truly enjoyed every moment. With enthusiasm, Diana asked Liddy, "Next time you come, teach her elven fencing as well." Meanwhile, Reich stated that before Liddy returns, she herself will thoroughly train in wielding magical power. Before finally leaving, Liddy also added, later she wants to entrust the workshop ISO not only with repairs, but also with many other tasks. ISO calmly replied that when the time comes, she will definitely do it.